Hey guys, tonight we drift through lamplight and steam in old Istanbul, where copper kettles hiss like patient snakes and tiny cups clink with the soft, bright sound of porcelain applauding the end. You follow the glow of brass and ember through alleys that smell of roasted beans and rain-soaked stone, and you settle into a corner where shadows hum as gently as a lullaby. You probably won't survive this, at least not without wanting an unreasonable amount of coffee at 2 in the morning, but that's between you and your willpower. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is by you. I love watching our little night cafe spill across the map in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step under a hanging lantern, and the glass throws warm honey across the table. A copper sieve sits nearby, its long handle catching the glow. The surface breathes a faint shimmer of brown foam that the night has decided to crown like a soft hat. The owner slides you a fincana, small handleless cup cradled in a filigreed zarf, so your fingers don't learn hard lessons from hot porcelain. You lift it. The rim smells like roasted almond, faint smoke, and a promise you can sip. The first pour is deliberate. He tilts the sieve as if it were a clock whose seconds he can control, letting the foam kpk settle into your fincan like a miniature evening cloud. Without foam, he murmurs, it's only a story. You taste. Thick, silky, sweetness without sugar, as if the bean has remembered summer and decided to tell you quietly. Somewhere beyond the door, waves push against the Bosphorus and retreat, repeating themselves until even the city can't argue. Mainstream fact arrives without fuss. By the mid-16th century, coffeehouses are already anchoring neighborhoods of Ottoman Istanbul, places for talk, chess, news, poetry, and the kind of listening that turns strangers into a table. The room nods to that memory without needing to perform it. A backgammon board clicks like distant rain. A spoon rests across a saucer like a metronome, taking the night's pulse. You lean in, and the steam rises as if to keep your secrets. A boy glides past, carrying a tray crowned with tiny waters, a polite chaser, because thick coffee likes company and a bowl of candied orange peel. Someone chuckles, low and brief, and you catch a joke slipping through the air like a paper boat. 3 sips for courage, 4 for poetry, 5 for apologies. You laugh under your breath, already on sip 2, waiting to see which destiny you deserve. We keep it simple tonight. Lanterns, steam, and first pour. This is not yet a lesson in roots or roasting, or the measured ballet of hot sand. You'll hear the sand whisper later. Here, you learn the cup before it's mapped, the weight of the fincan in your hand, the patience inside a pour, the way a room slows itself so the foam can become a tiny moon. Your host tips the sieve again, and the second cup nudges the table into a softer orbit. Joke 1 drifts in. You tell yourself you'll sleep fine after this, like telling a cat not to climb curtains. The cat acknowledges your words, then proceeds to climb. Quirky tidbit arrives with a wink. Some zarfs gleam like small crown silver, mother of pearl, even tortoise-shell little thrones for cups that never needed chairs but got them anyway. Across the room a collector shows one off, engraved with tulips and a crescent, the metal patterned by fingers and years. He insists it keeps coffee warmer, then admits it mostly keeps conversations longer, which might be the same thing. The owner whispers that the first cups of the evening keep a rule older than his shop. No grounds on the lip. Never scorch the brew, and keep the foam intact like a seal on a letter. You watch his hands, listen to the sieve. A small lift, a pause, a return to heat. The craft so quiet it feels like prayer that forgot it was prayer. Somewhere a lute flickers in the next room, the melody walking barefoot across rugs and gossip. Historians still argue whether the very first Istanbul coffeehouse opened in one exact year, or arrived as a slow bloom, one storefront, then another, until memory decided to call a moment a beginning. The owner shrugs, polishing a spoon. Whatever the date, he says, the night learned a new way to be awake. He leaves it there, and you let the truth cool beside your cup, like another small saucer of light. A second tray appears, a tiny dish of locum rose, dusted with sugar that falls like quiet snow, and a glass of water that captures the lantern in its surface, and does nothing else except exist perfectly. You take a bite, the rose leans into the coffee, and the coffee agrees, and your shoulders forget their city habits. Joke 2 earns a drowsy smile. You decide locum is a vegetable, because it is plant-based optimism. Outside, a vendor's call unfurls down the lane and tucks itself under the door. You barely notice until the owner pinches the wick of one lantern to make the shadows friendlier. A cat threads the legs of a chair, curls into a comma, and edits the room into a sentence that ends in sleep. You blow lightly across your cup, the grounds swirl, then settle as if obeying a law of kindness. He shows you the saucers edged in, warm, and clean, and then tilts the fincan just enough to let the last sip linger. Leave room, he says, which applies to both cup and conversation. You place the fincan down and notice the faint ring it leaves, a bronze halo that fades as quickly as a rumor. What gets lost, you wonder, and what remains? Recipes take on fog in a city like this. Measurements hide inside hands. A pinch, a breath, a line of foam seen out of the corner of an eye, it's all a recipe if you're patient, and not a recipe if you demand numbers tonight. The owner smiles as if he heard that thought, then slides a small notebook across the table. The paper smells faintly of clove. Inside are words without quantities. First pour for fragrance, second for sweetness, third for sincerity. It's either a recipe or a poem pretending to be useful, possibly both. A final cup arrives, shyly. You raise it, and the foam holds a tiny crescent. The room leans with the Bosphorus breeze. Joke 3 settles in place. You promise yourself this is the last cup and also begin composing a heartfelt apology to your future self. The apology is gracious. The cup is better. Somewhere down the alley, a door closes like a soft drum. Closer, a candle sighs itself shorter. You feel the night collecting its own grounds in the bottom of an invisible cup. You turn your fincan just so on the saucer without flipping it, no fortunes yet. Not in this first room, and listen to the quiet chatter of spoons finding rest. The owner nods at your empty cup, then at the street. We start here, he says. Later, you can chase maps and spices, and the rules that pretend to be rules. He tops your water, and lets you sit with the sound. The lantern swings once, then stills, and your breath swings with it out, then in, matching the city's gentle caffeinated tide. You follow the warmth of your first cup out into the night air, and the street tilts you gently toward the water, as if the Bosphorus itself is humming. Come on, let's go meet the bean before it met you. The lantern's thin, the clink of fincans drifts behind, and soon you're walking a dock where ropes creak, tar smells sweet, and wooden holes knock like patient knuckles. A dhow breathes at its mooring. You step aboard, and the deck answers with a soft complaint but allows the experiment. A time-leaning crossing toward the first rumors of coffee. Dawn opens like a slow lid. The boat noses south, and the sea writes and rewrites its own line until it becomes a lullaby with salt on every syllable. Sacks lean against the mast course weave, stamped with marks you can't read but trust. Inside, a cargo the color of olives, and late afternoon, green coffee, living seeds with journeys written in their skins. A sailor flicks a bead of water from the tip of his nose and says nothing, which is an improvement over talking about the weather again. Joke 1 surfaces and sinks. You promise not to spill a single bean, while simultaneously eyeing the horizon like it plans to test your core strength. The land lifts Ethiopian highlands in your mind's rear view, Yemeni mountains ahead like folded paper. Before beans had names on invoices, they were cherries glossy red, plucked in cool air, where Coffea arabica thrives. There's the well-worn legend of a goat herd goats, dancing after nibbling cherries. A monk curious enough to boil bitterness into wakefulness, but historians still argue whether Chaldee ever existed or was a perfectly brewed parable for discovery. Real or not, the hills themselves are fact. Altitude, shade, and careful hands taught the plant how to sing. You wander a path above terraced fields, and the air changes from sea to leaf. Women move with baskets, fingers quick, sorting ripe from almost their two piles. No negotiation. You taste a cherry, and learn quickly that the sweetness belongs to the fruit, not the bean. The bean is a stubborn little stone that promises future poetry, and presently tastes like a nut that hates you. A monk passes with a bundle, and you catch the scents that will become home: sun-dried pulp, parchment crackle, a hint of smoke. South across narrow sea, the story condenses. Yemen is where cultivation clicks into culture. In port towns and mountain villages, Zabded, Tadis, and Asufi, lodges warm the night with cups meant to steady eyelids through devotion, and markets hum with a word you already know. The port at Al-Mukt Moshe stuffs the world into boats, sacks piled like small hills waiting for the wind. Mainstream fact whispers through the din. By the 15th century, Yemeni growers and traders are exporting coffee widely, and by the 16th, the Ottoman heartlands drink it in volumes that make poets and bureaucrats equally alert. You step into a Yemeni roastery before any ship claims you again. The room is soot and song. A wide pan rides a charcoal bed. The beans shift from green to hay to cinnamon to press your face closer brown. Somebody stirs with a flat paddle, the scent brightening as sugars crack and oils think about becoming shine. A boy hands you a mortar dibbick, stone-shouldered by century sand. You learn the rhythm that decides texture. Pound, sift, pound, sigh. The powder rises in a small fragrant fog and clings to your cuff, declaring you involved whether you intended to be or not. Quirky tidbit pushes at your sleeve. Merchants guarding Yemen's monopoly allegedly scald some export beans, or roast them lightly so they won't sprout abroad, a botanical non-compete clause. Smugglers answer with stories. One pilgrim reputedly ties 7 fertile seeds beneath his clothes and ferries them east. Plantations sprout where paperwork said they shouldn't. Whether each tale is truth or wishful brag, you can hear commerce grinning. The dhow is loaded, the deck smells like rope and future mornings, and you nose across to Jeddah, then inland to Mecca and Cairo. Caravans threading prayer and purchase under the same sky. Cups bloom wherever the road rests, small, thick sips in spice-lit courtyards, strong, sweet servings near city gates where dust needs a friendly shove from the throat. The word kavahain gets built from floors, benches, and conversations, public rooms where men debate, play backgammon, listen to tales, and decide the news under a shared roof of steam. By the time you tilt back into imperial currents, the Ottoman map has drawn Yemen into its wide embrace. Guns and taxes make sure coffee's path knows who's boss. In Istanbul, the bean becomes both ritual and revenue. Guilds stamp sacks with marks of pride. Roasters, grinders, sellers of cups and zarfs, pot-beating tinsmiths whose hands can make a sezd sing on sand. You drift into the imperial markets where spices speak in color: saffron like bruised sunlight, cardamom pods like little green boats, and coffee, though technically brown, somehow shines. You back your shoulder against a pillar and watch beans change owners the way coins do. Fist convinced. With a little theater, scales swing. An apprentice calls measure zaka, and Daramanda scribe scratches notes that feel more like recipes than receipts. A porter shoulders to sacks, knees mapping the city better than memory, and vanishes toward a lane where a palace kitchen takes in the day's supplies like a quiet fortress of appetite. This is the unseen part of your cup's birth, a distance from dock to desk, from ledger to lips. Coffee learns languages as it travels. Bun in one mouth, kav in another, kawa in a third, always that double sigh in the throat. You trail a set of sacks up a slopestone stairs. A cat, with opinions. A door where the latch looks like it has sung lullabies, and slip inside a courtyard where a fountain practices whispering. Beans are spread for a last pick over. Bad ones flick aside like unhelpful thoughts. Mainstream fact brings its own saucer. By the mid-16th century, the first coffee houses have found address and argument in Istanbul. By the 17th, travelers write about them as if they've discovered a friendly planet that also keeps score in chess. Historians still argue whether the very first shop had a single clear founder or if a handful opened in a season and memory voted for a favorite. Your host from last section would say the date matters less than the habit. People began meeting on purpose to be awake together. A guild elder invites you to lift a handful of green beans and feel their coolness. You listen to him list the ports as if he's reciting a soft poem Ukajeta. Alexandria, then inland names that sound like game pieces placed on a map by someone who loves road dust. He points his chin toward the palace district and mentions a title with ease, Kavochi Bozi Chief Coffee, maker keeper of ceremonies so precise that foam height can become policy. You picture a line of sessives like obedient little moons and almost laugh at your own reverence. Joke 2 leans in. Somewhere a sultan waits, and you are fussing over bubbles like they're diplomatic gifts. They are. At the docks again, a sailor asks whether coffee is a spice, a medicine, or a drink. You answer yes, and he accepts that, because the sea has taught him useful vagueness. Nearby, a clerk separates sacks by scent alone, a parlor trick that doubles as quality control. A boy takes notes on a scrap of paper, then loses the scrap and keeps the notes in his head, which is how recipes survive when ink cannot. Weather rehearses a tantrum and forgets to perform it. The boat nudges the pier, and the city takes you back into the fold lantern's steam. Familiar clink. You realize the cup on your table is now a map. Shrub to cherry to bean, mortar to sack to scale, street to shop to hand. You swirl the last sip and let the grounds settle like tiny travelers choosing an inn. Quirky tidbit returns for a curtain call. A Venetian broker once wrote that Mocha's coffee carried perfume of far hills, while an Ottoman shopkeeper insisted his beans remembered the wind. Who's right? Your nose votes both. Your fingers vote for the Sesfi's hand-along brass. A small comet in the lamplight, because all journeys want to become heat. A tray sets down. Water, a square of locum, and a little notebook with words without quantities again. The owner taps a new line you hadn't noticed. Find the roast that makes the room breathe. You nod, which is not helpful, but is accurate. The night tucks closer to the windows. You cradled the finken and promise, sincerely and falsely, that you'll stop at one more. Joke 3 smiles in your cup. This is research, you tell your pulse. Your pulse, being Ottoman, negotiates. When you finally set the finken down, it leaves a ring that vanishes, like a tide practicing modesty. The owner warms sand in the hearth. He doesn't say ready, but the Sesfis on their hooks do. You've followed the bean into the city. Now you're going to follow heat into flavor. Roast pound. Whisper until the room learns a new way to breathe. The brazier wakes with a sigh. You slide closer, palms over a shallow pan where green beans freckle and shine. The shop is small roof black with years of perfume and the roaster stands quiet, paddle in hand, steering a river of seeds through heat. He doesn't measure, he listens. The beans chatter when they want, turning brittle gossip like chickpeas, and you learn this is not cooking, it's courtship. He lifts a few with a spoon, fans them, lets you breathe the moment between grass and caramel. Not yet, he says, and back they go round and round over coals. A cat purrs at the tempo of stirring, which feels like cheating but is actually mentorship. Mainstream fact. By the 17th century, Ottoman roasters and grinders belonged to guilds with rules on weights and honest measures, the acre weighing, the dirham counting, fines for short scales. Coffee is a profession with a code. The beans darken straw, toast, roofs after rain, a few pop softly, tiny knuckles on the pan. The roaster smiles as if hearing a first word. Now, he tips the pan to a tray, spreads the beans thin, stirring to bleed heat into the room. Smoke curls into brief calligraphy that means soon. You want to grind immediately. He says wait. The whisper begins here, that small resting beans do after fire, when oils settle and the roast stops running ahead. He cracks one under a thumbnail inside. A clean seamand lets you taste the bitter that promises sweeter later. You nod like someone who understands patience. The beans cool anyway. In the corner, a stone dibbock squats, rim polished by wrists. You roll your sleeves, take the pestle heavy as a promise, and Learn the rhythm that is lived in these streets. Lift, fall, listen, lift, fall, sift, not grinding so much as persuading. Beans fracture, splinter, sigh into powder. Your shoulders find the beat. From time to time he scatters the mash onto a silk sieve, shakes, returns the stubborn pieces, and you begin again. Too fine and you choke the cup, he says. Too coarse and the foam weeps. You believe him. The pestle thumps a soft drum, the street learns by heart. A neighbor taps back with a wooden spoon, as if you've started a festival. Joke 1. Your only dawn drum solo gets rave reviews from cats. He tips a pinch into your palm worm, fragrant, sticky with oil. You rub your fingers and turn brown with tomorrow's plan. He shows the mortar's dented lip nicked where his master's ring. Knocked for 30 years and tells how some elders could tell a blend by ear, the tone changing when cardamom sneaks in. Later for spices, he smiles. Quirky tidbit. Some households saved the first smoke of a fresh roast, bottling it in cloth 2-cent garments coffee cologne that claimed both kitchen and street. A few swore the smoke kept moths from linens and sadness from rooms. He speaks of Thomas roasting houses, whose courtyards echo with pestles at dawn and how a good mortar could summon customers from 2 alleys away. Then he sets a hand mill on the bench newer tech, 2 stones kissing and lets you turn the handle. The burr sings high, the powder flows like river silt. Both tools keep their dignity. The dibbick hums lower, older. He sweeps the ground coffee into a jar, lined with paper and unlined with hurry. Dark likes shade, he says, tying the mouth with twine. Give it a breath. Historians still argue whether Ottoman households rested roasted beans before pounding, or whether cups followed flame by minutes, not hours. Practice likely varied palace kitchens with schedules, alley stalls with impulses, homes with whatever the auntie in charge declared correct. He pulls a slip from under the scala recipe, without numerals, cousin to the cafe notebook, roast to the color of a wet roof, pound till the pestle stops sticking, sift until winter snow. Another line, if the mortar sings low, listen. If it sings high, listen more. You fold it into your sleeve. Mainstream fact again, brief. Ottoman coffee is ground very fine, almost flour, so it can suspend in water and raise kpk foam that crowns the cup. Coarser grinds belong to other worlds. You practice the last step, the whisper not in action so much as in attitude. Hold a pinch beneath your nose, inhale through your mouth, let the scent lay itself on your tongue before it speaks. The roaster nods. If you can taste it without drinking, you're ready to brew. It sounds mystical, it feels practical. Across the alley, a boy chalks, fresh roast. No gossip with the foam. Somebody ties a tiny zarf around a water glass as a joke. It makes 0 sense and total sense. Joke 2. A passerby asks if you sell decaf. 3 pigeons laugh in Ottoman. The roaster drops a few unground beans into a pouch, for the pocket, he says, against long walks and longer talks. Traders once chewed them when cups were far and time was close. He douses the last coal, then clears a rectangle on the bench where hot sand will sit in a brass tratha stage for the next act. He doesn't pour yet. The room lowers its shoulders. Your wrists rest on the table's warm edge, remembering weight and rhythm. Historians still argue whether women pounded at home as often as men in shops, whether some quarters preferred mortars over mill, whether palace kitchens hid grinding behind screens so the sound wouldn't compete with music. The debates are gentle. The coffee is gentler. You brush the last dust from your fingers and find the jar's lid waiting like a quiet promise. We roasted, we pounded, we listened, the roaster says, as if counting stars. Now we float the sky on a cup. He sets the seive on the sand tray and looks at you the way a teacher looks at a student an hour before a first performance. The beans that crossed seas and slept through smoke are now small as breath and loud as memory. You feel ready not for the world. Exactly, but for the next 30 quiet seconds of it. Joke 3 arrives politely. You apologize in advance to the foam for anything you are about to do to it. The roaster forgives you on the foam's behalf, which is excellent manners all around. A cart rattles past, a door hums shut. You hear the grain slide of sand being poured, a hush the color of bronze, and the says handle turns, like a compass needle finding north. Your pulse and the city's pulse line up, and the whisper you learned at the mortar leans toward flame. The brazier exhales, and the tray of sand spreads like a tamed esper, bronze, level, and faintly glittering where stray light lands. You set the sezv into it, as if nestling an egg in warm ash. Copper meets heat with a small polite tick. The long handle points away from the flame like a compass, and your wrist learns the language of angles. First, the quiet arithmetic. You tip in cold water, not warm, never hot, because the rise needs a beginning that's honest. A spoonful of finely pounded coffee follows, a pinch for each cup, and a whisper more for the tray. As the roaster grins, you draw the spoon once through the mixture, blending grounds and water into a dark, still pond. If someone wants cyclerly, sweet, or orta medium, the sugar goes now, before heat. If they prefer sod unsweetened, you respect the minimalists and your future dentist alike. Mainstream fact slides into place with the spoon. Ottoman service names sweetness by tradition's odd orta zekerly, and custom expects you to remember who ordered what, without writing on your palm like an anxious student. The sand is the teacher. You lower the sezve finger's depth into the bed and feel warmth climb the handle. No flames licked copper here. Heat hugs from all sides, an embrace rather than a shout. Tiny bubbles begin at the rim, silver beads testing their courage, then retreat. You do not stir. The roaster's eyebrow reminds you, stirring now bruises the future foam. You let heat draw breath through the liquid like a slow tide. Somewhere outside, a cart rolls by with theatrical indifference. The street believes it invented rhythm. The first rise sneaks up like a story you've heard but want to hear again. The surface darkens to velvet. Then a pale ring appears at the edge, the KPK, announcing itself in a crown so thin it looks like confidence. You lift the sezfist a fraction. A breath-breaking contact with the hottest sand, the foam settles obediently, and you lower it again. Up, down, a lullaby of heat. The rise and sink that builds structure without tantrum. Joke 1 bubbles up. You're basically doing tiny squats with a copper pot and calling it culture. Listen, the roaster murmurs. He doesn't mean the room. The sez begins to whisper, not a boil, never a boil, but a hush like wind through felt. You tip the first lace of foam into each fincon, dividing the crown between cups, with the care of a jeweler setting pearls. Back to the sand. The liquid darkens again, thicker now. Aromas climb the handle into your sleeve. Cocoa, smoke, something like toasted bread, remembering the field. Historians still argue whether hot sand heating was universal and old. Ottoman shops are one technique among many, some preferring coals, others iron plates. Portability winning over precision in street stalls. What survives in memory is the show. Sand trays glowing under lantern light. Rows of sesas, rising and sinking like patient swimmers while a keeper's hand conducted heat without words. Your hand learns quickly. You feel where the center burns too eagerly, where the edge asks for time. A second rise swells. You rescue the foam again, letting it sit in the fincons like calm weather. Back, once more, for the body of the brew. The grounds heave gently, the fish-eye opening, where steam lifts the surface. Not yet. You coax it lower with a small lift, because a boil would shatter the quiet and kick grit into anger. The sez returns to sand, breathes, and you sense the moment to wait in the handle. A scent you'll be able to name only as done. Quirky tidbit lands with a wink from an ant across centuries. Some old-timers tap a single drop of cold water onto the center of the foam after pouring, claiming it seals the moon and keeps the crown from collapsing on the walk to the table. Science shrugs, tradition smiles. The foam holds. You pour slowly down the cup's inner wall so you don't drown the foam you just courted so tenderly. The stream is glossy, thin as ribbon, steady as breath. Grounds carry themselves to the bottom like polite guests who know when to sit. A final tremble of the cesp, a last filament of liquid, and you set it aside in the sand where it remembers warmth and forgets worry. Steam hangs with discipline. You lay tiny glasses of water beside each fincanut to rinse rudeness from the mouth, but to prime it gently so the first sip tastes like flavor, not dust. The cups rest in their zarfs, metalwork glinting like quiet applause. You pass them one by one, and the table becomes a small archipelago of moons. A newcomer orders with drama, the sweetest you dare, and the roaster nudges you to repeat the dance. This time your hand knows the sand like a map. The sesp sinks and rises in the cadence of a lullaby nobody had to teach you. Foam grows confident sooner, and you remember to divide it before the brew deepens. The second pour makes its own arguments. The room votes with silence and quick little smiles. Between cups, the roaster shows the tin lining inside the ses kept bright, renewed when copper peeks through because old coffee deserves good metal. Copper is nimble with heat. Tin is gracious with flavor. He taps the rim with a spoon, one note for caution, another for memory. He points to a dent and tells of a busy night when 7 ses crowded the tray like impatient pigeons and he learned where his left hand ends. You see him point at his forearm and know the lesson stuck. Mainstream fact nudges your elbow again. Palace service refined this ritual into ceremony. The Kavuchi Bazi chief coffee maker trained a cadre whose foam had to meet a height, whose pour had to pass a glance. In some courts, servants carried cups at precisely measured paces, so grounds settled in transit like obedient sand. Your pace tonight is less exacting and more sincere. The foam forgives you because you are trying. A boy leans at the door, counting rises 1, 2, 3 on, then grins, because he knows you will not let the third crest fray into boil. The room takes a little pride in your restraint. Joke 2 strolls in with a backgammon clack. Someone whispers that you've earned a license to look judgmentally at kettles for the rest of your life. You promise to use this power only for good. You wipe the sesif's lip with a cloth the color of roasted chestnut. Then reach for a second pot, smaller training wheels for heat. You practice with plain water, learning how quickly a boil claims the center, how a tilt of the wrist changes everything. The sand remembers every experiment. The table forgives every one you don't serve. The cups cool to sip warm. That window where aroma is generous and bitterness gentle. First sips murmur around the room. Someone hums approval. Someone else closes eyes in the international language of yes. The foam melts slowly into the body, leaving a thin ring like a tide line on porcelain. You feel the grounds settle under gravity in years. Again, the roaster says softly, and the sand is ready. You repeat the ritual with the focus of hands that have decided to be useful. The ses sinks, rises, sings. The cups collect small moons and keep them. You become the person who never stirs once the heat begins, who divides foam like an inheritance, who hears the difference between whisper and murmur and understands that neither is a boil. Historians still argue whether multiple lifts 2, 3, sometimes 4 were a signature of particular districts or simply the personal style of proud shopkeepers. The arguments taste friendly. Your own style has already chosen you. Patient first rise, generous foam, modest second, then pour. A lull drapes itself over the door. Someone opens it just enough to let in a corridor's cooler air and a sliver of street violin. You rest the ses on the sand, like placing a baby on a warm pillow. Joke 3 drifts by, drowsy and true. You realize you've brewed enough caffeine to power a small philosophy department, and yet you are somehow getting sleepier, as if the ritual has wrapped the beans in a blanket. The roaster puts a finger to the tray's edge. You can learn heat by touch, he says, but better to learn people by cups. He nods at the table sod, paused a little longer before the first sip, order disappearing in 3 measured mouthfuls, cyclically punctuated by small sighs. You file the data under hospitality, a science that refuses lab coats. You pour one last time and set your own fincon down by the window. The foam trembles and then decides to stay. Outside, the night changes keys. Inside, the sand holds a soft red heart under its surface. The sesfi's handle glows dull and honest. You reach for your cup, and the room, without looking, reaches with you breathing in, breathing out until the line between heat and hush becomes just another gentle curve on the surface of the coffee. The sand keeps its red hush while the roaster opens a drawer you hadn't noticed. Your low, velvet-lined a traveling stage for scents. Little tins slide forward with discreet clicks. The room, already persuasive, decides to become a perfumery. Open, he says, and you lift the first lid. Cardamom stands up like a polite guest, who has already composed a toast. Green pods. Citrus cool and pepperwarm, the kind of smell that tidies a room and your posture at the same time. He pinches one, cracks it, releases tiny black seeds that smell like someone ironed mint. For those who like their coffee to sit straighter, he adds, tapping a few into the palm of your hand. You roll them between thumb and forefinger until the air feels lifted a shade. Next tin, clove. Dark nail-headed buds gleam like tiny punctuation marks that insist on being exclamation points. Their perfume is winter, weddings, and the memory of cupboards. A little goes far. A lot announces itself at family meetings. The roaster grins. Clove makes neighbors, he says. Sometimes admirers, sometimes complaints. Third, mastic. That pale resin from trees that drink wind on Chios. Pearls of sap that look like frozen tears. You crush one grain and discover a forest-laced sweetness, like vanilla that studied law and passed without bragging. He drops a few into a warm spoon and lets them just kiss heat until they soften. Then sets them aside, perfume ready for a cup that prefers to flirt quietly rather than sing. A fourth tin opens with diplomatic ceremony. Ambergris, the sea's strangest gift. Wax from whale wanderings turned perfume by sunlight and salt. It smells like ocean incense, clean and animal at once. You are torn between fascination and polite distance. Rare, the roaster says. 4 princes and poets with long pockets. Quirky tidbit glides in. Some court kitchens kept ambergris not in the spice cabinet but with the perfumes. Its destiny undecided between dessert, drink, and the sultan's sleeve. Mainstream fact slides onto the counter without show. Cardamom coffee is a well-loved tradition across Ottoman lands, and their neighbors still poured today from Arabia to the Levant. Pods cracked and simmered with the brew, so the cup inhales cool brightness. You nod, because even your fingers smell convincing now. He sets a dybbuk on the bench, not for beans this time, but for spice. You grind 2 cardamom pods to powder. Add the pinch to a spoon of ground coffee, and tumble the blend into the seize with cold water. No sugar. Sod with sparkle. The sand resumes its patient breathing. The surface lifts. Foam arrives like a small white sail. First pour, second whisper, and the cup lands in your zoff. The nose is a tidy room with a window open. The sip, silk with a twist. You feel the edges of your thoughts straighten like book spines. Now nonsense, he says cheerfully, and opens a paper twist of clove. One but only one is, cracked lightly with the pestle, and folded into a zeekerly brew. The sweetness makes clove hover rather than hammer, a ghost of spice that nods from the balcony. A man 2 tables away inhales audibly and refuses to look envious. Joke 1 flickers. You declare clove to be the cologne that shows up uninvited to the party and still leaves a thank you note. On a brass dish he warms the softened mastic until its edges relax. He swirls a drop inside a preheated fincan, letting the resin perfume the porcelain rather than the liquid. Perfuming the cup, he says, not the coffee. The seize va base, the foam divides, and the pour glides down the perfumed wall. The result is a sekizli kovamasakist quiet. Creamy in aroma, though there is no cream. The aftertaste a clean pine vanilla that lingers like a kind thought. Your shoulders remember to be unknown. He hesitates at the ambergris tin, then closes it again, then opens it with a sigh. Palace things, he murmurs, measuring with the shy accuracy of a jeweler. A speck, nothing more, mashed with sugar to make a scented syrup. Some say it gilds the foam without speaking, he says. Some say it speaks and forgets to gild. Historians still argue whether ambergris ever flavored coffee beyond rare courtly experiments. Was it a fashion, a rumor, or a confectioner's perfume that only occasionally strayed into the seize? Tonight, it is a myth you can smell. The cup that follows is not fish, not flour, just a warmth that feels older than the spice rack, and more polite than the sea. You sip and decide discretion is its recipe. On a shelf, you notice tiny bottles labeled Gul Su Yu and Nergis Rose Water and Narcissus. A wrist's worth, he warns, dipping a finger and painting the inside rim of one cup so faintly that only the foam will meet it. The coffee arrives and drags the scent into its steam. You get a whisper of garden that does not dare become tea. Between sips, a glass of water resets the stage like a curtain drawn and lifted again. He pulls from beneath the counter a folded sheet, the same words without quantities script. You've begun to trust more than scales. For strong mornings, it reads, crack to pods, no sugar, lengthen the rise, sit near a window. For storytelling nights, mastic in the cup, clove only as rumor, sugar to the smile of your guest. For diplomacy, ambergris, if budget allows, otherwise, cardamom and patience. The shop grows quietly theatrical. He sets a tiny incense brazier beside the sand, drops in a crumb of mastic and a thread of frankincense, and turns a fincan upside down over the smoke for a slow count of 5. Cup lining by cloud, when he writes it. The porcelain wears a veil no eye can see but every nose can. He pours. The foam collects, modest and assured. You drink and think. So that's what a perfumed cup means, not a loud recipe, but an atmosphere folded into the vessel itself. Mainstream fact clears its throat again. Top copies palace kitchens kept ledgers that mention cardamom, mastic, musk, and amber purchases for confectionery, sherbets, and occasionally coffee service. A phrase that tempts more than it tells. You imagine the kavuchi bazi tinkering after midnight, testing drops and grains the way a calligrapher tests line widths, finding the edge between delightful and distracting. Across the room, a woman unwraps a napkin to reveal salaporchid tuber flower used for thickened drinks. Later section, the roaster says, laughing, he winks at your curiosity and lets another tin speak. Cinnamon, ground to dusk, a mere dusting over foam for a cup destined to flirt with dessert. You try a sip and feel like you've put on a scarf that complements your intentions. Joke 2 stirs. You inform the room that mastic is also excellent for jawlines when chewed as gum. Your cheek muscles nod in sore agreement. An old man flashes a grin that suggests he's been working out with gum since Sultan Soh. In the doorway, a boy sells candied peel and tiny sesame rings. The roaster buys a ring, snaps it into thirds, and drops one piece into a Zekerly cup for those who like their coffee to remember bread. The sesame wakes the bitterness in a friendly way, like an old teacher greeting mischief. He returns to craft. Spice must never boss the cup, he says. Coffee first, then a mood. He lines up 3 fincans, sod with cardamom's whisper, Orta with mastic's memory, Zekerly with clove's courtesy. You taste left to right and then back. A little private flight, where each landing feels like coming home with different flowers on the table. At the edge of your hearing, the city drapes its own perfume: sea salt, wet rope, grilled fish conceding to evening, a lemon sliced somewhere in philosophy. You realize these cups belong to that chorus, not above it. Recipes here are neighbors to weather. Take one, he says, for the road between rooms. He means a tin. You choose cardamom, because your pockets already smell like it, and a small packet of mastic pearls that click like tiny marbles in your palm. He adds a handwritten note: paint the cup, not the coffee, and slips it under the twine. Joke 3 yawns and stretches. You decide that your future kitchen will contain 12 tins and one memory worthy of each. Your wallet requests a meeting. Before you rise, he lifts the ambergris lid once more, inhales lingeringly, and closes it with 2 fingers as if tucking in a child. Some things, he says, belong to nights with fewer witnesses. You nod, already sleepy, under the spell of scents that behave like stories. Outside, the alley receives you with air cooler than cinnamon and warmer than clove. The brazier glows behind you, the sand purrs, and a cup somewhere in the room learns the perfume of its own porcelain. Your fingers carry a trace of resin and a hint of the sea. The city turns a page, and you follow the line, slow and steady, toward rooms where ledgers whisper and kitchens keep their little, fragrant conspiracies. Corridors narrow, lamps steady, and the night folds you into a hush different from the street, a hush built of polished stone and practiced footsteps. You pass beneath arches where the air itself seems trained, and you arrive at a complex that breathes with sleeping authority. The kitchens of Topkapi, the Matboi Meyer, are not one room but a city inside a palace. Chimneys like minarets of flame, courtyards tiled with patience, doorways labeled by appetite. You drift past the Helvehane, the confectionery where sugar learns diplomacy, and the Gerbethane, where sherbets rehearse summer. Somewhere deeper, behind doors that polish sound into velvet, a smaller world of fire keeps just one star burning: coffee. Your guide's keys whisper along a ring. He opens a side door, and the heat floats out, friendly and awake. Here, copper sesses sleep upright like slender bells. Cups huddle under cloth as if modesty were an ingredient. The room smells like roasted midnight with tiny cords of cardamom and mastic braided through. You recognize the hierarchy without being told. On the far side, a low brazier for trials. Near it, a tray of sand wide enough for ceremony. At the center, a stand with ledgers stacked like quiet verdicts. He lifts the top defter, a ledger bound in leather that creaks the way old knowledge does. A clerkly hand marches down the page in neat Ottoman script: Akar of Yemen coffee, Darhem of mastic, 1 box of cloves, 2 bottles of rosewater, tin lining renewed for 3 cents. You don't get numbers for recipes. You get quantities of trust. A margin note says simply, for the Kavuchi Bazi. The title feels ceremonial and practical at once: chief coffee maker, curator of foam, choreographer of speed. A person whose hands know how far a cup must travel through corridors without losing its moon. Mainstream fact stands quietly beside the brazier. By the 16th century, coffee service is formalized in the Ottoman court. The Kavuchi Bazi and his trained pages supply the sultan, the valid sultan, and honored guests with cups that meet standards: heat, sweetness, foam hitaz, exacting as any edict. You picture corridors timed like metronomes, steps counted, so grounds settle in silence, trays that move like planets with soft, confident gravity. On a low table, you find words without quantities, again this time on burnished paper with a seal. Night audience, order foam divided, perfumed cup if requested. Morning council, sod, quick rise, water before and after. Another line is even quieter: when the sultan fasts, keep the cups near. The scent is company. You touch the edge of the page as if it were a sleeping hand. The Kavuchi Bazi appears, and all the copper in the room seems to sit up straighter. He greets you with the smallest bow, the kind that says, "We show respect with control." His hands are narrow, quick, undecorated, except for a ribbon of heat pink along the knuckles. He glances at the ledger, then at the sand, then at your face, weighing your pulse against protocol. "We will brew for a room that is not here," he says. "So we do not disturb the rooms that are," he means the hazoda, the inner chambers, where quiet is furniture. He sets water in the sezd, coffee as fine as whisper, and a glance asks you to add sugar 1 pinch, 2, then stop. "Visitors today," he explains. "Foreigners prefer order so they can be agreeable twice." Joke 1 drifts in on the steam. You promise to be agreeable twice and dramatic never. The corner of his mouth forgives you in advance. While the sand warms, he opens a small zarf chest. Inside, holders like jewelry, filigree of silver and gold, tulips and enamel, mother of pearl, catching the lamp like a polite star. One plain but perfect has a hinged lid. "For distance," he says. "The foam travels under a roof." Quirky tidbit follows with a chuckle. Some lids, he admits, were so finely made that pages practiced opening them with 1 thumb while walking. So the cup would arrive unveiled at precisely the right temperature, as if a magic trick and a courtesy had decided to marry. He tilts the cesp. The first ring of KPK shows and you recognize the rise and sink you learned at the shop, but here, the heat is even quieter, the motion minimal. He divides the foam among finkins not yet seen by anyone but you, then returns to deepen the brew. While it finishes, he flips open another ledger, older. In a margin, amber, grease squeezed between purchases for candies and inks. We tested, he says, reading your thought. Not often. Historians still argue whether it ever belonged in the cup or only in the sweet. I remember only once in my master's time, and even then the ocean spoke too loudly. He closes the book, sealing the sea back inside. He paints the inside rim of one fincan with the faintest rosewater, another with a breath of mastic, and leaves a third plain so the Sultan will have choice if the knight asks for it. He pours with the patience of someone who has met the consequences of haste. Foam sits, water glints in companion glasses, and the tray becomes royal by intention alone. He sets a Cinia-brought copper tray on a folded cloth, not to shine but to turn sound to velvet. You ask about the route from brazier to hand. He answers by walking the room with the tray, counting steps under his breath, turning corners with a pilot's geometry. Here, the floor dips, he notes. Here, a draft. Here, a servant forgets he is a wall. You understand why ledgers can list ingredients and still be secrets. The recipe lives in distance as much as in spice. He allows a pageboy with shoulders like parentheses to practice. The boy's wrists hold the tray steady while his eyes memorize a moving floor. Again, the master says, and the boy circles until your own feet begin to believe the path. Joke 2 surfaces. You realize you've just watched the court invent a silent dance, whose only applause is foam that didn't fall. At the edge of the brazier stands a little tin of salt. For copper, the master says, and for tongues that forget themselves. He taps it twice on the tray. You decide not to be the reason it is needed. He pours a cup for the valid sultan that is not present secretly. Perfumed cup, lid on, and one for the council that is asleep, sod, no perfume, lidless, meant to announce itself. He sets them side by side, as if comparing two lines of calligraphy, one curved, one severe, both necessary. Mainstream factory turns to nod. The harem and the divan both claim coffee. But cups are tailored by roll sweetness and perfume for intimate rooms, directness for decision. The master turns to a shelf where grounds dry on muslin, spread thin. He rubs a pinch between fingers and shows you the uses that don't make ledgers. Copper brightened with spent grounds. Gardeners feeding roses with the same. A laundry maid darkening thread for repairs when ink runs out. Coffee is more than a drink, he says. It keeps working. He lets the grounds fall like soft rain from his hand. From behind a lattice you glimpse a stricter ledger, stamps from the Kailari-Hassas. The imperial storerooms, red wax like small moons, entries for fuel, tin cups repaired, trays replated, no recipes, just proofs that the ritual stays possible. You imagine nights when the palace sleeps, and a lone page rewrites the inventory in his head as a poem: water, heat, foam, pace. The Kavuchi-bazi returns to the sand and teaches you a final palace habit. After the last pour, he taps the seize gently on the tray's rim, one soft knock. That is for me, he says, to know we are finished. He does not say, and does not need to, that there are knocks for trouble too. He offers you a cup, the plain one, soddened. You take it with two hands because your wrists want to be worthy. The foam sits like a calm decision. You sip, the room folds into the taste. Copper's kindness, water's honesty, coffee's long, dark sentence, ending in a period you can almost see. You set the cup down with more precision than you've given anything all week. He closes the ledgers, one by one, fingertips hovering a heartbeat over each cover as if blessing a finished page. The last book's leather smells faintly of clove and sea. He ties the ring of keys with a knot that could hold a small boat to a large storm and says, not unkindly, the rest you cannot learn in one night. Joke 3 sighs into being. You vow to return for a full apprenticeship. He smiles in a way that suggests you've just volunteered for a decade. As he dims the lamps, the sand keeps its low red thought, and the cups return to their nests like small moons between phases. In the corridor, the palace remembers itself. Tiles calming, air cooling, guards speaking the language of boots and silence. You carry the taste with you past courtyards where fig leaves shiver like gossip, past a fountain that edits its own music down to a whisper. When the door closes behind you, the kitchens are again a city of sleeping embers. and the ledgers dream of akas and dirhams marching in neat lines. Out in the night, the Bosphorus makes its old argument with the shore, and you, cupless but not coffeeless, drift back toward the public rooms where chessboards and gossip are waiting to test the patience you have learned from foam. You leave the palace kitchens with their ledgers and measured footsteps and follow the night back to the city's louder heart, though loud here means backgammon, tiles clacking like polite hail and a lute practicing its indoor voice. A lantern sways above a door whose curtain reads Kavahane in script that curves like steam. Inside, benches line the walls. A brazier glows with responsible mischief, and cups wait on a copper sini that reflects everyone into soft gold. You breathe in roast old wood and a rumor of cardamom. The room exhales and makes space for you as if chairs know hospitality. A meta sits on a small stool by the pillar, a storyteller with a voice trained to be silk when needed and gravel when deserved. One hand holds a kerchief, the other a slender stick. With these he becomes sultan, soldier, lover, scoundrel, all without leaving his square of rug. He's halfway through a tale from the Hamza-name, switching characters with a tilt of wrist and a cough that sounds exactly like a corrupt tax collector. Laughter ripples, low but unanimous. On the wall, a canvas screen waits for Ladder Karags and Hassavat will bicker in shadows after the last call to prayer. Their quarrels as old as the soot on the lamp. You slide onto a bench. The proprietor reads the room like a ledger. Janissaries with boots, relaxed but never unwound. Scribes rubbing the day from their fingers. A barber whose comb has heard every secret, and will hear one more. A chessboard is already an argument, black bishop pensive. White knight convinced, and two men whisper over a printed gazette that smells like fresh ink and gossip. Mainstream fact hangs its hat. By the late 16th and 17th centuries, coffeehouses knit the Ottoman city together, meeting places for news, poetry, games, and the theater of talk so successfully that authorities noticed not only the cups, but the conversations. The ses move like planets around a patient sun brazier. Foam rises, sinks, divides. Sod for the player who thinks better without sugar. Orda for the one who likes mercy in his mouth. Zekerli for the optimist. You remember to sip water first, a courtesy your tongue now craves. The meta punctuates a dramatic pause with the clack of a backgammon doubling cube. A cheer goes up so gently it sounds like a mother humming. Near the window, a pair of janissaries trade quiet jokes that only soldiers find funny after midnight. They watch the door without watching it. The proprietor sees them and lets the cups arrive a degree hotter. Joke one strolls past. You imagine the foam standing at attention. The foam ignores your military metaphors and continues to be delicious. A boy threads through with nargile hoses coiled like well-trained snakes. Water pipes have joined the repertoire, bubbling in rhythmic applause. Someone orders titian flavored with rose, and the smoke rises, polite and persuasive. A thin gray calligraphy that edits no one's sentence. Above the brazier hangs a painted sign with 3 rules in neat counsel: no cheating at cards, no loud voices near poetry. Foam respected. You nod at all 3 like a visiting diplomat. Then the door unrolls, a draft and a murmur changes color. A decree has been posted in the quarterso, the rumor says, reminding the city that coffee houses are, for a time, unwelcome. It's not the first time you've heard this melody. Historians still argue whether the repeated bans were about morality, fire risk, tax dodging, or the politics of men who gather and think aloud. Some edicts blamed idle talk, some the smoke of new habits, some the fact that a room with many ears is a room with many opinions. The most severe came under Murad IV in the 1630s, when taverns and coffeehouses alike felt the closing hand of order. In practice, the bans tended to arrive like winter, stern, inevitable, and eventually persuaded by spring. The proprietor doesn't panic. Life in a city is a conversation. Edicts are only one voice. He lowers one lantern to a friendlier level, tucks a few cups deeper into their zarfs, and shows you the emergency plan written in gestures. The brazier will look like a brazier. Water will stay water. And chess, being timeless, will claim legality under the laws of rain. Quirky tidbit slips from a corner table. In some years, shopkeepers registered their rooms as barber shops, with razors on display and coffee incidentally present. Elsewhere, a back room for storage, stored only conversations. The bored men grin. The city has 1,000 sleeves, and each fits a different card. The meta clears his throat and begins a new tale, this one about a sultan who tried to ban Dawn, only to discover that Dawn had friends. The room catches the allegory at once and thanks him by listening more intently than laughter could ever measure. In the silence between lines, a spoon makes a small circle in a Z curly, then stops, remembering the house rule about foam. You sip and watch the shadow carriag's curtains sway in a breeze that doesn't exist. The puppets are already rehearsing behind it, their black profiles naughty as commas. Later they'll argue about taxes, then about love, then about whether a donkey counts as an expert witness. A janissary will try not to laugh and fail honorably. A scribe will cover his mouth and pretend to cough. You will decide that shadows are just cups of light turned upside down. Mainstream fact again, steady and unexcited. Coffeehouses were policed, taxed, closed, reopened, sometimes redirected toward quieter names. Crothane. Reading houses, especially in later centuries when reformers preferred literature to loudness. Yet the essence rarely left: cups, games, news, and the art of sharing time. Near the door, a tray appears with sesame rings and a dish of tahina pekmez, sesame and grape molasses, that tastes like breakfast, remembering its responsibilities. A man jokes that this turns coffee into dinner. The proprietor replies that dinner has never complained. Joke 2 soft shoes in. You consider asking for a receipt that lists bean therapy. Then decide your ledger is a pillow and tonight's audit can be sleep. The door opens again, this time just a breeze, and a street seller's call fading like a watermark. A coffee boat on the Golden Horn. Someone says Cove Kaik will still be serving at dawn. Cups steady in the boatman's hands as gulls write their round signatures above. The room trades small plans. Who needs to be up before the muezzin? Who has letters to copy? Who intends to do nothing except earn tomorrow by being kind to tonight? The proprietor sets a tiny incense bowl near the floor mastic, and a thread of frankincense so the room smells like a story that just ended well. A chess pawn reaches the 8th rank and becomes a queen with all the dignity of a comb wearing a crown. The janissaries finish their cups, and leave a coin and a look that means the world is ordinary and all right for now. You lean back. The decree outside itches the neighborhood, but the foam here has decided to stay. The meta ends with a prayer disguised as a joke. The room laughs like a family that has survived small weather, and you notice a brush near the hearth ready to erase footprints of ash if the door receives an official boot. The proprietor sees you see and winks with the eye he doesn't use for measuring water. Bands arrive, he says quietly, and so do kettles. He waves his spoon like a truce flag and a conductor's baton. We keep the cups warm for when rules cool down. He pours you a final order with a dusting of cinnamon that pretends to be a curtain call. The foam sits moonstill, undaredand. The grounds gather like a council at the bottom, ready for a later fortune you aren't taking yet. Your fingers warm around the zarf, your ears warm around the room. Outside, patrol steps pass, measured, unimpressed. Inside, backgammon dice decide to be lucky for exactly 3 more throws. Joke 3 curls up next to your cup. You vow to avoid politics and promptly cast a decisive vote for another sip. The ballot is unanimous. The cup wins. When you finally stand, the proprietor slides a piece of paper into your sleeven. Other recipe without numbers. When speech is risky, brew softer. When hearts are noisy, pour slower. When decrees are loud, let foam do the talking. You tuck it away like a charm. You step back into the lane, where the night has become a quieter argument between cats and moonlight. The decree on the wall flaps once, then remembers modesty. Behind you, the coffee house resumes its steady caffeinated heartbeat. Cups, stories, twinned shadows, proof that some rooms are stronger than paper, and that certain recipes include courage whether or not they write it down. You drift from the coffeehouse into streets that soften their own footsteps, past shuttered stalls and cats editing the night, toward a doorway where the air turns from kitchen to chapel without changing temperature. The courtyard is modest whitewashed walls. A cypress leaning in like an attentive elder. On from within comes the low, woven sound of breath and syllable. Dicker, remembrance, stitched to rhythm. Lanterns lift a honeyed hush. You slip off your shoes, step onto smooth wood, and the room receives you with the kind of quiet that knows when to sing. A reed flute threads a thin, human sigh through the air. A daff answers, its frame drum voice, soft as a hand against a door you mean to knock politely. Robes swirl at the edge of your vision, white skirts turning slow constellations. You sit near a side table, where a small brazier whispers and a zest waits like a patient vowel. The man tending it has prayer beads around his wrist and a burnished ladle that could count time better than most clocks. He nods once, the universal sign for you're right on time for something older than the calendar. He draws cold water, measures coffee with fingers that have folded 1,000 dawns, and sets the pot into the sand. No sugar yet. Tonight the recipe has fewer ornaments and more intention. The beads slip through his fingers, 33, 33, 33, a rosary metronome. He lifts and lowers the cess with that same count, the rise and sink sinking to breath and bead. Mainstream fact steps in quietly. Sufi orders across the Ottoman world Mevlevi, Helveti, Kadiri, and more kept long night practices of chant and movement. Coffee often steadied those vigils, a stimulant that turned drifting minds toward focus without the rowdy music of wine. Jurists debated, lodges decided, and cups learned the quickest route from brazier to prayer. The first foam appears kpk, like a small moon, remembering its orbit. He divides it between cups and returns the zest to heat, letting the brew darken into a low, persuasive voice. You hear the ne lean a note until it bends like a reed in damp wind. And something in your chest agrees to remember, too. He paints a fink on rim with a breath of rosewater. Not for perfume tonight, but to mark the cup that will travel to the sheikh, the order's elder. The zarf is simple wood. The cup wears humility the way foam wears light. Sod, he whispers unsweetened so the tongue hears itself. He smiles like a person who has made peace with sugar and chooses truth. Joke one tiptoes through. You vow to be spiritually serious and then quietly hope someone brings locum later, because enlightenment pairs well with rose. The whirling widens. Not performance, not spectacle, Sam, as practice. Bodhi's making calligraphy in the round. Black jackets slip from shoulders to the floor, the symbol of worldly weight set aside, white skirts bloom. And the room becomes a slow galaxy. The ney sings the curve of it. The daff keeps the soft heartbeat. The voices weave all, like silk pulled through a ring. The coffee tender times the second rise to a turn, the pour to a pause, so the cups arrive between breath and breath. Historians still argue whether the earliest ritual use of coffee began with Yemeni Sufis, the lore of Zebde and An. Night chants and wakeful brews, or whether public stalls and wayfarers' fires popularized the habit first and lodges adopted what the street already loved. Arguments smell faintly of cardamom and are best enjoyed with patience. You accept the idea that truth travels like caravans, sometimes in front, sometimes behind, sometimes disguised as a merchant selling lamps that are really stories. Cups circulate with the caution of boats in a harbor of sleeves. You lift yours. The foam sits quiet as consent. The first sip is earth-turned velvet, no sugar to rehearse smiles on your behalf. The grounds settle like good advice. You set the cup down, and the brazier's heat curls the air into lines you could almost read. Quirky tidbit wanders over in soft shoes. Some lodges keep tiny spoons carved with a line from a hymn, the letters almost too small to see. Stirring the first sugar into a guest's cup becomes a prayer written in circles. Others time the boil by misbehaprier, beads counting, lifting, counting, so every rise gathers a name of God without the brew ever forgetting physics. A dervish once whispered to you, half joke, half credence, that a single drop of cool water on the crown teaches the foam patience, which is either good theology or excellent kitchen sense. A small tray arrives with 3 expectations: water, a date, and silence with room for hearing. You sip the water not to rinse but to reset. The date tastes like a remembered afternoon. The second cup is for the calm heart. The third for the sir, the quiet interior where a person keeps their weather reports. The tender pours accordingly, his left hand steady as a story, his right holding the handle like a line of script that refuses to wobble. Mainstream fact leans in again. Legal opinions in the 16th and 17th centuries wrestled with coffee's status halal, permitted, or makruh disliked. Some early bans in Mecca and Cairo argued from intoxication by analogy, others from public order. Over time, the Ottoman mainstream settled toward acceptance, especially as the cup moved from lodge to palace to street with equal grace. The night nods. The room keeps turning. The sheikh receives his sod cup with a tilt of gratitude. He doesn't drink immediately. He listens to it first, like a poet considering whether the page wants another word. Then a sip. Then his eyes close on a syllable that might be music and might be meaning. He sets the cup down and the nay answers with a phrase that makes your shoulders forget their address. You notice a bowl of ground mastic near the brazier, membered from the perfumed shop pan, ask with your eyebrows. The tender dips a finger, draws a thin ring inside one empty cup, and explains, for those who bring dessert in their throats, it's a mercy measure sikisli for tired voices. Tonight, only a few cups wear the pine vanilla trace. Most are barefaced and brave. A young dervish sits beside you between turns, robes stilled, pulse visible at his neck like a small drum hiding under cloth. He whispers that before he learned to whirl, he learned to hold a cup level while walking the hall in embarrassment for a week. Balance, he says, is a household skill. Joke 2 stretches. You admit you trained for balance by carrying tea upstairs without spilling. He nods gravely, as if you confess to a heroic deed. The Sez sings its threadbare song, never a boil, always a whisper, and you begin to understand why devotion prefers it. The drink keeps you awake but not loud, attentive without arguments in your veins. The tender lines 3 cups on the tray and, with a thumb, presses each sarf just enough to test heat like a parent testing bathwater. He sends the tray into the orbit of the Semahain, the dance hall, and it returns with moons emptying in their time. Historians still argue whether the Mevlevis drank during the whirl itself, or only before and after. Some lodges kept cups for interludes. Some treated the dance as a closed sentence. Either way, the beverage and the movement share a grammar. Repetition until meaning clarifies. Care until heat becomes presence. Circles that lead to a center without maps. The night lengthens kindly. Someone begins a hymn to the prophet, and the room stitches another seam in its long garment of praise. The coffee tender closes his eyes for one measure longer than usual during a pour, and still divides the foam with exact grace. He has learned the road from brazier to lip so well he could walk it in darkness. Maybe he already is. He shows you a small ledger, not palace clean, but lodge loved, where expenses meet devotions. Acres of coffee matched against nights of chant. Sugar counted by visits from neighboring poor who take sweet cups and sweeter bread. In the margins, a doodle of a Sezd with wings. You smile and he shrugs. Sometimes the pot flies, he says. At least in drawings. Joke 3 taxis onto the runway. You promise to sketch one later, doing a respectable landing near your pillow. The last whirl slows to a courtesy you can feel in your bones. Robes fold back into jackets, beads return to wrists, and the nay bows its head into silence. You finish your cup and tip it gently, not to tell fortunes, not yet, but to lay down the grounds like a small prayer rug for what tomorrow might whisper. The tender collects the cups as if they were sleeping birds. Outside, the courtyard air cools your face, and the cypress keeps its counsel. A cat chooses a step and pretends it invented stillness. Your breath matches the lingering drum inside, in, out, and you realize the recipe you just drank had 3 ingredients: bean, water, repetition. The night adds a 4th, intention. You leave a coin and a thank you written in posture. The door closes like a kept promise. Down the lane, the city resumes being a city, but softer. Lanterns consult their reflections in puddles. Someone hums a line the nay forgot to finish. In your sleeve. Another card from the pocketless cookbook of the evening. For long nights, sod, foam divided, pour on a breath. If hearts wander, count the rises. You tuck it into memory and walk without hurrying, caffeinated enough to notice, calmed enough to let noticing be enough. The lane leaves chant behind and picks up sugar the way a sleeve picks up light. You step under a wooden eave where jars lean like patient moonspeck maize as dark as walnut shells. Bal honey the color of late afternoon. And a mountain of white zeker that squeaks when the scoop goes in. The room is smaller than a shop, bigger than a secret part pantry. Part workshop and, someone with sleeves rolled past the elbow is persuading a copper pot to be kind. She nods, you toward a stool. You've met sod, she says, setting the sezv into warm sand. Now meet coffee that remembers dessert. Sugar first. She tips in cold water, ground coffee as fine as a quiet thought. Then a spoon of sugar for Zekerly. You've had it already, but here the sweet seems softer, as if the crystals were smaller or the hand more experienced. Foam rises, divides, and the first cup lands in your zarf, with a little hat of KPK that refuses to slouch. A sip and your shoulders admit they might forgive the century. Then the darker jar pekmez, grape molasses, thick as a bedtime story. A teaspoon slides in, dissolving slowly so the brew tastes like grapes that forgot to be wine and decided to be steady instead. The sweetness is round, the bitterness wears manners. And you understand why winter kitchens kept pekmez the way sailors keep rope. Mainstream fact nods from the shelf. Before cane sugar arrived in profusion through the Ottoman networks, molasses and honey sweetened kitchens from Anatolia to the Balkans. Even after sugar grew common, pekmez stayed, loyal as bread. Try the mountain, she says, lifting a shallow bowl. It's not a mountain, it's kaymak-loaded crim so thick, it holds a spoon like a polite hostage. She warms a fincan, sets a coin-sized dollop at the bottom, and pours orta over it. The cream rises slowly, a pale island in a dark sea, melting at the edges like a compliment that finally lands. Your first sip is velvet. Your second is a reminder that texture is also flavor. You chase the island with the spoon and lose, which somehow feels like winning. Joke 1 perks up. You declare kamak to be a flotation device for troubled mornings. The room approves with a grin and a refill. The next trick takes more hands. She brings out a small tin labeled salaporkid tuber flower, pale as snow kept under a bed. A pinch in cold water whisked, until there are no ghosts of lumps. Then warmed gently, until the mixture turns from water to silk. Into this, a half measure of coffee and a whisper of sugar. The pour is slow. The fincan receives a drink that moves like honey, remembering how to walk. You test the rim with your lip and realize you'll need a spoon. Coffee has become spoon-slow, a drink you eat, a dessert that insists on also being a sermon. Quirky tidbit falls out of the drawer with the spoons. Old cellars of salep in Istanbul rang brass bells on winter mornings, steam rising from urns like a rumor of heaven. Children chased the sound, and adults pretended not to run. Some swear a seleptic and coffee lived briefly in those months, lodged between drink and pudding, where cold couldn't find you. Whether this was fashion, necessity, or a vendor's whimsy may never be noted, but your cup tonight argues convincingly for possibility. A copper pan appears like a relative you forgot to invite. SDL Kov. She says milk coffee. She warms milk separately, never boiling, and pours it down the inside of the cup after the coffee, so the foam survives the introduction. The result is softer, rounder, with the moral clarity of a lullaby. Historians still argue whether milk belonged in Ottoman cups. Publicly some insist. Coffeehouses kept too black, while homes, palaces, welcomed milk. Others find hints of STL in stalls where children watched the brazier with hopeful eyes. The ledger may never confess. The lips remember anyway. She sets a honey jar beside you, and this isn't a recipe so much as a philosophy. Honey doesn't dissolve as obediently as sugar. It threads itself, slow and stubborn, into the dark. The cup that follows tastes like orchards thinking about prayer. You picture the Helvehant, the palace confectionery you passed earlier, and understand why their ledgers list honey, sugar, molasses side by side, different keys for different hymns. A little rose jam arrives, GL Raquel, a spoonful on porcelain that glows slightly with the lantern's opinion. You're instructed to take a petal on your tongue, then sip sod. The rose stands up straight, bows and leaves the room perfumed without overstaying coffee. It turns out, likes to meet sweets adjacent, not always inside, locum, quince paste, sesame rings, even a spoon of tahina pekmez, to answer bitterness with well-behaved fat. She pulls a slip of paper from under the sugar binure, old friend, the recipe without numbers. If the wind is sharp, try pekmez. If the day is kind, honey. For arguments, kamek. For reconciliations, salop. You tuck it into your sleeve with the guilty speed of a thief stealing a proverb. Back to the brazier. She makes zeekerly again, this time with a finger's dot of mastic painted inside the kupta. Perfumed porcelain trick you learned earlier. Then pours so the foam meets resin, and the drink remembers pine without telling everyone. She taps the sesp once on the sini, the little knock you saw in the palace, and you realize you're learning a dialect of sound. Taps for done, bells for winter, spoons for jokes. Mainstream fact puts a hand on your shoulder. By the 17th and 18th centuries, sherbets, salop, and boza, a thick, lightly fermented grain drink, shared streets with coffee. Sweet, thick, and warm, occupied the same evening, and customers moved between them like different rooms in one house. Coffee could be stern or soft. The street didn't force a personality on your cup. She lines 3 finkins like guests with different temperaments. In the first, zeekerla clean, bright, no fuss. In the second, pekmezlia duskier sweetness, a little more shoulder to lean on. In the third, Kamakoke cream island intact, the spoon laid across like a bridge. You taste left to right, then right to left, then decide directions are a modern problem and joy is older. A whisper from the corner suggests a final experiment. Egg yolk beaten with sugar until pale, then loosened with hot coffee turbie. A kitchen trick more often for soups, but occasionally rumored for the sick or the thin. She tries a spoonful into STL cove. The result is custard, thinking deep thoughts. She laughs and writes nothing down. Some recipes prefer to live as gossip. Historians still argue whether the thickened coffee cups were widespread or mostly palace play. The Helvehane testing boundaries while neighborhood shops stuck to familiar measures. Travel diaries praise creamy cups without saying which cream. Household notebooks mention kamak and coffee with the same tone they use for weather. As with all things that pass through mouths, proof is mostly memory. A boy arrives with ice wrapped in cloth from a yakchal, like Pitt outside the city's summer's generosity hiding in winter's cave. That's another chapter, she says, chiseling a flake into a glass of sweetened, chilled coffee that tastes like Mazagran's distant cousin. Not our section, but your hand understands thirst faster than taxonomy. She wipes the rim of your finkon, a gesture half maternal, half ceremonial, and sets down a glass of water for pacing. Drink, then decide, she says. You do, and decide nothing except that variety is an accurate synonym for hospitality. Joke to land softly. You promise to remember that comic is a condiment, not a personality trait. Your spoon argues otherwise by standing upright in your cup. On the shelf, a tin of cinnamon leans into a pair of cardamom pods like neighbors over a fence. You ask for a compromise and get a dusting thin enough not to edit the coffee's sentence, just enough to underline a syllable. The foam wears its spice like a thoughtful hat. By now you've learned a rule that doesn't ask to be written. Let the coffee be coffee. Let sugar, milk, pekmez, salop and cream act as mood, not take over. Even kamak knows when to melt and when to float. You're surprised to find that the sod you began the night with tastes even richer after the tour. As if understanding sweet has taught your tongue new patience with bitter. A small paper finds your sleeve again. 4 mornings, pekmez, or honey, never both. 4 fevers, SDL, if the aunt agrees. 4 winter doors that won't close, salop in the cup, cinnamon on the foam. 4 confessions, kamek, 1 coin only. You fold it like a promise. Joke 3 curls up on the counter. You ask whether there's a recipe for visit from the in-laws. She smiles without looking up. Double foam. Then listen. When you step back into the alley, the air tastes faintly of grape and milk and the stubborn sweetness of cities that refuse to sleep You carry the heat in your hands and the thickness on your tongue, and the night, pleased with your progress, loosens its belt another notch. Somewhere, a bell announces salop. Somewhere, a coffeehouse closes one eye and keeps the other open for the decree that forgot to mean it. You walk slowly, spoon still in your pocket like a small, silly trophy. Ready for the next room that claims your patience and rewards it with a cup that behaves like a kind sentence. You step back into a night that forgot to cool and decide to forgive it anyway. The lane widens to a small square where lamps hang like oranges and everyone is negotiating with summer. Sellers have traded braziers for ice tubs, wooden buckets jacketed in burlap. Do beat it and smug. A boy rings a handbell with the confidence of an orchestra to bright notes, a pause, to more the universal anthem for bet. Your spoon from earlier taps your pocket like a co-conspirator. You let it stay, a tiny anchor for chilled plans. The first stall is a symphony of glass, tall bottles of Vicny sour cherry, Damerhine de Marind, Lemon Manek, Violet, and Gulsuyu rosewater. Each syrup the color of a sunset that refused to end. A copper e-brick sits in a bucket of slush, snow and salt kneaded together, so the ewer sweats and the liquid inside gets colder than a complaint. The vendor lifts the e-brick, its neck slick and shining, then pours rose sherbet over shaved ice into a fluted glass, whose rim smells faintly of gardens and gossip. You sip and feel your teeth file a formal protest, which you file under worth it. Joke 1. You tell yourself you're hydrating, and your coffee habit nods from the bushes like a suspect pretending to be a tree. Snow arrives like a minor miracle. A Karchi snow seller trundles past with a cart lined in straw. Its belly full of mountain winter. Packed car from high slopes west of the city. Sleeping in ice pits and cellars outside town until nights like this. Mainstream fact steps forward. Cool as a jug, Ottoman cities. Kept snow and ice, houses underground pits, and thick-walled rooms, feeding a summer trade in chilled sherbets and medicine. Caravans and boats hauled snow from mountains such as Uludag toward Istanbul, layered with straw to slow time. He parks by the fountain, lifts the lid, and the square applauds by exhaling in unison. A second stall offers Karsam back-shaved snow, drenched with pekmez or sour cherry, spooned into porcelain cups that clink like polite bells. You take a bowl and watch it sink into itself. The vendor grins. Eat like a hurry, he advises. You do, and discover that grape molasses plus snow equals a cold sentence with excellent punctuation. Someone calls Buzz. Buzz Ice. As if announcing a celebrity. A man with tattooed forearms chips at a block with a narrow pick, sending clean shards into a clay jar of lemon slices. He adds a thread of demirindy, and a breath of rosewater swirls, and pours into thin glass that fogs like a shy window. He explains the mixture for the 100th time tonight with admiration that hasn't tired. Tamarinds temps, lemons stare, roses whisper. You look for the cup that led you here, and it finds you in an unexpected corner, a slim kettle that smells like strong coffee, but shows no steam. The woman behind it nods once. Sokak cold then gestures to a basin where concentrated coffee rests in a bath of snow salt. She ladles a finger of it into a glass, adds cold water, a squeeze of lemon you are absolutely not expecting, and a ribbon of sugar. The color holds, the glass sweats. Your curiosity pulls a chair. You sip. It's bright, bracing, and oddly familiar, like a doorbell you heard in another language. For sailors, she says, for courtyards, for days the wind sits down and refuses to help. Early Mazagran mood, if not name. Historians still argue whether these lemon-sweetened cold coffees were common in Ottoman ports before the 19th century, or if the famous Mazagran story belongs mainly to French soldiers in Algeria carrying the idea home. The glass answers with modesty, call it what you like. Tonight it's relief. Across the square, a man in a vest nearly as red as his Vicny syrup shakes a copper cup with theatrical flourishes. Water, cherry, a drop of vinegar circumcubans, tart cousin, then strains it through muslin into a line of glasses. He pinches the rim of each glass with mint, leaves the way a scribe pinches a quill, and the square suddenly smells like prayer that discovered punctuation. A girl stitches between ankles, carrying candied orange peel with toothpicks. She sells by glance and vanishes before your second look. A low door to your left opens into a snow cellar. You duck and let your eyes find their night vision. Walls slick with cool straw stacked like sleepy haystacks, blocks of buzz wrapped in cloth. Men work by touch and habit chip pass, wrap, repeat, every shard a small sun they rescued from drowning. A tub of salted slush churns gently, science hiding in plain sight to chill yours quicker than patience. A clerk counts in akka and darhem, which sounds ceremonial but here mean cold math. Back outside, a sherbet seller performs the old trick of frosting a glass. He packs snow around an empty cup, sprinkles coarse salt on the outside, and waits while the square watches glaze bloom on glass like a polite miracle. He then pours violet sherbet, pale and perfumed, the color of a rumor about spring. Quirky tidbit rides the rim. Some vendors floated a jasmine blossom on summer cups, not to flavor so much as to remind the tongue what flowers look like when they mean well. A boat nosed to the quay is lit like a small stage. The Kovcate coffee boat rocks gently, its owner steadying ebricks as if the sea were an apprentice. He sells sokak kov by the glass, coffee cooled with rosewater ice that looks like treasure from a perfume thief. He sets your glass on a tiny saucer that immediately slides an inch as the boat size. He catches it without looking. Joke 2. You consider tipping the Bosphorus for service, and then remember it tips itself. Mainstream fact wanders back with a parasol. The Gerbathane Palis sherbet, kitchens stocked recipes for seasonal drinks, and the Lael Devry tulip era in the early 18th century loved public leisure fountains, gardens, picnics where iced sherbets starred. Accounts describe sherbet sellers like punctuation in parades. And travelers write of Istanbul's cool drinks, as if the city had invented civilized thirst. You nod at history and at your glass at the same time. The coffee woman shows you her process by invitation, not lecture. Brew thick coffee earlier in the day. Decant off the settled grounds, cool in a covered jar, then cut with cold water to taste. Sugar or pekmez, according to temperament. Lemon for travelers who miss the sea or need it. If the day is shy, she adds. Add rosewater to the jar, not the cup. She hands you a paper, the familiar no numbers, catechism, for heat that argues. Coffee strong, water honest, lemon soft, for evenings on stairs. Cherry stone syrup, 2 ice slivers, sit where the wind finds you. For guests from far, say their port aloud before the pour. You pocket it like a spell. In another corner, a mason jars his coffee sherbet, a rumor more than a recipe, a light sweet coffee infusion, cooled with snow and perfumed with a breath of mastic or orange blossom. He sells it to people who want coffee's memory without the meeting. You taste and think of syllables without sentences. It is charming and almost useful. A Dondermuk ice cream man glides by with salep-thickened stretches of vanilla that snap and fold like small flags. He offers a spoon, and your spoon in pocket declares itself redundant. You accept anyway. A vow of moderation trips on a cobblestone and pretends it meant to sit down. The square's music adjusts to cold, the clack of tongs, the clink of glass against glass, the sultan ice scratch that sounds like snow writing a letter to July. A man balances to yours across his shoulders on a yoke and pours, without spilling, while answering 3 questions at once, and teasing a cat that is teasing him first. Historians still argue whether the boatmen or the barbers began diluting coffee with cold water. Says a woman to your right, speaking to no one and everyone. Sailors swear ocean rights. Barbers swear mirror rights. You decide both may be true. Ports invent practical theology. A boy offers camphor water, a cooling draught some swear by, others avoid. You pass gently and choose tamarind instead, which puckers your lips into an opinion your mouth refuses to file publicly. A man in a vest whispers that vinegar honey old Circan Cuban revives wilting gardeners and uncertain poets. You try a sip and write a poem in your head about shade. As the hour slides closer to dawn, a breeze remembers its purpose. The Sokakov woman hands you a final glass, no lemon this time, a mint leaf and a thin ice wafer that clings to the rim like a gull, considering philosophy. The coffee is clear, brown gold, and honest. The bottom has no mud because the mud napped in the jar earlier and agreed to stay. You drink and feel the night soften around its edges. Joke 3 leans on your shoulder. You vow that tomorrow will be only, and tomorrow winks from behind the samovar. It's pretending not to hide behind. On your way out, you pass a Busan door half closed against curiosity. The keeper nods, conspirator to sleep, and pushes a scoop of snow into your palm like a benediction. You hold it on your wrist until your pulse settles. For a moment you think you can hear the mountain that made it. The square dimly applauds the idea of dawn. Sellers begin to pack bottles back into straw cradles, ice covered with cloth, bells muted. You fold your no numbers, slip and tuck it deeper, where cool recipes can dream until noon. The city exhales a last warm breath and inhales something a degree kinder. You follow the current downhill, toward water and gulls and one more cup that might decide to be cold or hot depending on who you are when you arrive. You've chased heat across sand and perfume across porcelain. Now the night leads you down a quieter lane where the air smells like coffee, only not quite. The brazier glows, the usual red. The zest waits with the usual patience. But a jar on the counter, small, dark, stubborn, announces a detour. Meneng. The shopkeeper cracks the lid. The scent that escapes is part pistachio, part pine, part rain on dry stone. He holds out a handful of tiny berries, really, the fruit of a wild terebinth tree. Pistacia terebinthus, cousin to pistachio, and local to these hills. Coffee without coffee, he says, and the description fits. No bean, no caffeine, but the same ceremony reaching for a cup center. He warms a shallow pan, scatters the berries, and lets them pop and darken, then tips them into a stone dybbuk. The pestle falls with the familiar thud you've learned to hear as promise. Oil rises green gold. Resinous in his hands move with a rhythm that decides both texture and mood. Powder becomes paste. Paste becomes something the spoon can carry like a sentence. It means mainstream fact stands comfortably by the mortar. Menengic Kavesa terebinth coffee is an old Anatolian and Levantan staple, especially in the southeast. Sometimes simmered simply with water, often with milk for a creamy, gentle cup. No caffeine, but a full mouthfeel, and a flavor that nods at nut and forest at once. Your host chooses milk tonight, because the hour is tender, and your pulse has already met enough drums. He spoons a thumb of the paste into the seize, adds cold milk and a little sugar, and sets it in the sand. The surface glows, shivers, and gathers a soft, pale KPK that looks like a cloud visiting on purpose. He doesn't divide the foam. This cup wants its crown whole. The pour is quiet, the room, softer still. You sip. It's silky, round, slightly wild at the edge, as if a pistachio went walking in the woods and learned manners. He laughs and pulls a second jar bidum, a deeper paste pressed from the same fruit. Cousin to the bidum soap you've heard waits in market stalls of cert, scented like clean pine. He stirs a smaller spoon into water this time, a sod version, and the cup arrives with more resin in its voice. You could drink this on a cold morning and believe in roads. Quirky tidbit hops politely into your lap. In some towns, the menengic paste itself was sold by traveling hawkers, kept in tins like tahini, spooned into cups at home with boiling milk when braziers slept. Children grew up on it. Elders swore by it, and late-night readers used it to court sleep without courting consequences. A few hosts even tinted the foam with a drop of grape molasses for color. A tiny masquerade that fooled exactly no one and pleased everyone anyway. The shopkeeper slides another bowl forward. This one full of something earth-brown and fibrous, hindabachikari root roasted and ground. He grins, for times when coffee is rare, expensive, or stubborn. He stirs a finger of chicory into the says, adds water, and lets it darken. The result is leaner, harsher, sweet, the bitterness different truth, not roast with a body that sits lower in the mouth. Stretch the coffee, he says, or replace it when the ledger or the law insists. Historians still argue whether chicory crept into Ottoman cups, mostly through French influence in the 19th century ports like Izmir, Alexandria, Beirut. Learning the blend from European trade or whether roots and grains had been roasted as substitutes much earlier wherever beans and budgets missed each other. The room lifts one shoulder. Either way, the cup knows how to cope. He shows you a tray of roasted grains, barley gone chestnut, wheat gone serious, chickpeas stained the color of late toast. Noat kavesi, he says chickpea coffee, and you can almost hear an army marching across a prairie of compromises. He crushes the chickpeas, stirs them with water, and brings the brew to a whisper. The sip is mild, friendly, a little bread-like. The foam is shy and short-lived, but the warmth is real. Campaign drink, he shrugs, and home drink when ships are late. There's talk of acorn coffee in forests, date pit in palm towns. Carob when sweet and bitter both need to take the stage without beans' command. The ledger of substitutes is long. The recipes are honest about being not quite and good enough. A fisherman leans in the doorway, calls for a half-and-half coffee with a spoon of chicory. The shopkeeper obliges. Grounds and roots share the says, and the foam grows butterscotch dark, lower, steadier. The man drinks like he has a boat to push and a dawn to meet. You taste the leftovers. It's Ottoman New Orleans by way of the key. Proof that ports invent blends faster than rules can catch them. The Dybbuk returns to work. He tosses in a few cardamom seeds and a pinch of cocoa someone's cousin smuggled from somewhere far and unbothered by poetry. Then pounds a Dybbuk kavesi blend coarser than usual, meant for a slower brew and a friendly foam. Not a substitute. This one, just a neighborhood style, mortar-made texture, spice leaning its shoulder, and the cup that follows tastes like a small crowd agreeing. Mainstream fact taps the counter again. In wartime, in embargo, and during tax spikes, substitutions weren't romantic, they were math. Ledgers from shops and barracks mention roasted legumes and roots stepping in when beans ran short. Family notebooks hide practical notes like barley keeps peace until payday. You nod, because the cup has been honest with you all night. Try this, he says, handing you a fincan marked with a charcoal dot. SDL Menengic, again, but with a drop of mastic painted in the cup. The resin lifts the forest note into a chapel. You smile despite yourself. Joke one pads over. You declare mastic to be the polite translator between tree and tongue. Your host bows on behalf of conifers everywhere. He opens a paper twist and spills a few fig seeds into your palm, then a handful of date stones chalked with ash. Some roasted these, he says, when the fruit was gone and the pits felt stubborn. He roasts a few in a spoon over the brazier, grinds them, and proves his point. The drink is thin, smoky sweet, more story than solution, but in lean years, stories are solutions with manners. A boy brings a ledger from the shelf, a tiny one, more pocket than book listing cups served on Fridays and Ramadan nights. Coffee, Menengic milk drinks, sherbets. The boy's thumb taps where Menengic served as night's friend for elders awake before sahar, where children copied the motions of parents with cups that wouldn't keep them buzzing until sunrise. You tuck the image away, the ritual of coffee surviving even when the bean sits out a dance. Historians still argue whether these substitutes were embraced for flavor first or for necessity first. Your host muses, polishing a zarf. Some say taste, some say tax, some say habit. All drink. He pours you a chicory stretch of real coffee, 1 spoon of hindaba, in a says of otherwise faithful. The foam drops a little, the scent deepens. Your mouth learns an older kind of bitter it didn't know it missed. Quirky tidbit throws a wink from the doorway. In one coastal town, a wedding morning meant Menengic for the groom's house. Gentle, symbolic, not jittery, while in another, it meant mira, the bitter, cardamom-rich Arab coffee poured from a tall pot in tiny sips that argue politely with your tongue. The map of cups is a patchwork. The stitches are stories. You get ambitious and ask for a flight, for a thimble cups odd coffee. Half coffee, half chicory, STL menengic, Noah arranged like corners of a family you didn't know you had. You drink clockwise. The circle makes sense. Your pulse thanks the bean for its leadership and thanks its cousins for their soft skills. A scrap of paper lands near your elbow. Tonight's recipe without numbers. When beans are scarce. Roast humility, chickpea, barley, date stone. When sleep is fragile, menengic with milk. When budgets sigh, Hindaba shares the says. When guests arrive with different clocks, offer the map 4 cups. For moods, you fold it along a crease some previous hand began and feel adopted by a tradition that writes with ellipses, not exclamation points. Joke 2 sidles over. You decide to host a tasting at home called Beans Who Weren't, and your wallet files an injunction. Your spoon agrees to testify as a character witness. The brazier takes a breath. The room, a longer one. Your host cleans the dibbick with a slice of bread waste. Nothing and hands you the bread, because flavor shouldn't retire before midnight. He wipes the says flip, taps it once for goodbye, and lets the sand slope back into itself like a dune forgetting footprints. You stand, lighter than when you sat, and realize the night has taught you another grammar, that coffee is both a plant and a practice. That the practice will happily invite cousins to the table when seasons, taxes, taste, or mercy suggest it. You step into the lane, and the air smells faintly of nut and root and a future not bothered by names. Joke 3 lingers like aftertaste. You promise to switch to chicory tomorrow for balance. Then catch your reflection in a window and see a person who will absolutely not do that. The window forgives you. So does the night. You tuck the no numbers, slip deeper into your sleeve, and follow the street toward a corner where cups turn into oracles. Where grounds climb the walls of porcelain and pretend to be maps because the next room speaks a dialect of luck, and your fincon is ready to learn its grammar. The lane tilts toward a doorway trimmed in blue bead and brass charms, a little shrine to curiosity. A sign above the lintel curls like steam. Fall. Inside, the air is lazy with rosewater and old stories. Cushions lean into carpets. A small table waits with finkins already warm, and a woman with hair pinned like a careful argument smiles as if she recognizes the future on your face. You sit. She sets a fresh sod beside your hand and taps the saucer twice, polite summons for intention. Drink to here, she says, touching a notch on the cup where the heat gives up its temper. You obey, stopping before the grounds become a neighborhood. She nods, toward your chest. Make a wish. Don't say it unless you want it to run away. You think of something small and kind. The wish sits down like a cat that has chosen you. Joke 1 pads in. You vow not to wish for more wishes, then accidentally wish for more coffee and decide it doesn't count. This is how a cup becomes a grammar. You twirl the fincon 3 slow circles clockwise, because that's how the night is moving, and flip it onto the saucer in one practiced, breath-held motion. A seal of foam kisses porcelain. She tucks a coin under the cup's foot to weigh the luck and sets a ring on the back to call the guest, which is a delicate way to invite love, or at least a polite visitor. A spoon rests on top like a paperweight for steam. You're instructed to press the cup with your palm. Warmth carries words. Let them imprint. While the cup cools and the grounds slide down in slow constellations, the falsy reader makes tea for herself, the way someone keeps their hands busy when their eyes are listening. Mainstream fact pulls up a cushion. Coffee cup reading cove follies, a deep habit in Ottoman lands and their heirs. The fincon flips. The tobac saucer catches the drip, and the reader studies patterns of grounds along the walls. The custom lives in kitchens and courtyards, in harems and markets. Noted by 18th–19th century travelers who couldn't resist having their road predicted for the price of a cup. She lifts the cup, taps the rim with her nail, and turns it toward the handle. Here, she says, is you, opposite the handle, far, near the rim, soon, near the bottom, deep hidden, old, or stubborn. She tilts the saucer. If the drip left a path, your wish isn't shy. If the cup sealed tight, it's thinking. Your cup, modest but cooperative, has left a thin river from rim to saucer. Good, she breathes. A door opens without knocking. She begins to read the walls. A long line clings to the inner curve road. She says, travel, or work that acts like travel. A little cluster of dots, coins. She smiles. But not greedy, maybe payment someone owes you, behaving better than usual. A triangle rises near the rim letter. News folded once. You see a heart shape that is more potato than poetry. She laughs. Hearts don't have to be beautiful to work. Joke 2 sits down with a cushion. You ask if a heart that looks like a shoe still counts. She says only if you plan to walk in it. She turns the cup sideways and the shapes become animals. A bird near the top, message on wings fast, not formal. A fish low and plump, good fortune that swims where you don't always look, kitchen luck, household ease. A snake thin as thread by the handle, gossip, she says. Or a narrow problem, step over it. It would rather be avoided than fought. You note a ladder, promotion, she murmurs, or climbing out of a stubborn mood. She points to a ship with sails you would swear your wrist invented. Journey with help, she says. No one rows alone. The saucer gets its say. She flips it and reads the spills like islands breaking from a coast. See this arch? A doorway. Someone invites, a ring formed by a circular smear, pledge or partnership, not necessarily marriage. Work can wear a ring. A larger white gap, a quiet, she says, time you will call rest, others might call boring. Keep it. The grounds near the saucer's edge have made little teeth, paperwork. She groans universally. Sign, stamp, do not misplace. Historians still argue whether the coupe reading origin is courtly, Sufi, or kitchen-born. Some point to Yemeni nights where beans met prayer and patterns met patience. Others to Byzantine and Persian laconomancy, reading bowls and oil finding a new vessel. Still others suggest the Ottoman practice absorbed European hagiography currents, when tea leaf reading drifted back across Venetian and French roots. The Falsi shrugs in a dialect older than footnotes. People look at cups, she says, because cups look back. She rotates again to the bottom, the Kaaba, the thick place where heavy stories settle. A dark mountain with a path, work that asks for boots, she says. Or a habit you climb once a day, a key shaped by the path opening. Of course, keys rarely mean anything else. Near the mountain, a small eye watchfulness, she says. Don't be suspicious. Be awake. Quirky tidbit slides in wearing bracelets. Some readers seal the wish by tapping the cup's base 3 times and knocking on wood. Others lay a hairpin or needle across the inverted cup to draw a path for travel wishes. In one quarter, a reader places a blue bead on the back to distract envy while the fortune arranges itself. In another, a spoon of cold water is poured over the cup to open the road. A kitchen miracle with clear physics and confident poetry. She notices a tree branching near the rim. Family, she says, or a plant turning from one stem into many. A dog-shaped loyal help. A cat she arches an eyebrow, home mischief, or charm with claws. Pet gently. You remember the paw prints crossing the scriptorium of your other night lives, and accept that cats have tenure in all margins. You have a break here, she says, pointing to a narrow white road that runs unbroken to the edge. Clear path, short. It will not wait. Take it. Then, softer, and here, a puddle stalling. Don't stir it. Walk around. She turns the cup to show stars, tiny white pinpricks through thin film. Small joys. Don't Mainstream fact adds a saucer. In many houses, women read for women, trading news and comfort alongside symbols. But men read, 2 barbers, cafe keepers, traveling Roma readers with small fees, big ears, and cups that learn to speak dialects. In 19th century Istanbul, print almanacs listed symbol glossaries. Bird equals news. Ring equals commitment. Anchor equals stability. Scales equals justice. Democratized lexicon for domestic omniscience. She turns serious for a breath. This, she says, tracing a loop that returns to itself, is habit. It makes a road that calls itself home. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, step out and borrow another street. You nod as if your feet are listening. A quick flip, one last check. The inside wall shows a crown of foam residue circling clean. Respect, she says. Someone older or a tasked with posture. She points to the handle again and draws an invisible line to a small bird perched near the rim. Message from someone you already know, she smiles. Answer kindly. No night letters with sharp ink. Time, you ask. She lifts the cup to eye level. 3, she says, but cups don't tell units. 3 days if you are brave, weeks if you are busy, months if you are stubborn. Joke 3 steps in, bowing. You promise to be brave for 2 and busy for 1. And she laughs because calendars prefer honesty. She leans back and lets the cup rest. Not fate, she says, tapping the Finken's rim with the coin. Conversation. The cup reminds you what you already suspect. She pushes the coin toward you. Leave it or carry it, both work. You tuck it under the saucer and feel wealth behave like gratitude. On the shelf is a notebook like the ones that have been following you. Words without quantities. Now symbols without numbers. Bird for yes, soon. Fish for luck where you cook. Ship if the road needs water. Heart if you have a spare hand. Snake for rumor, don't feed it. Ladder for promotion, mind your foot. Ring for partnership, check your pockets. Key for the door you keep walking past. She closes it gently, as if too much certainty might wake the neighbors. Historians still argue whether the harem codified a private language of cups that later spilled into the street, or the street taught the harem its grammar, and the walls just made it echo. Either way, the practice survived bans and fashions, outlived rulers and lamps, because it requires nothing the city can't supply. Coffee, porcelain, attention. She rinses the cup with a thin stream and leaves it upside down to dry, because even fortunes appreciate boundaries. You stand lighter than when you sat, as if someone quietly rearranged your shelves. At the door, she presses a paper into your hand. The night's catechism returns. When the road is loud, read the handle. When the heart is loud, read the bottom. If nothing appears, wash and rest. The cup is teaching patience. You fold it like a map. Outside, the lane has learned to whisper. Somewhere, a boy rings a sherbet bell farther away than you thought possible. A breeze turns your wish once in your pocket and settles. The cat from the cushion appears on the step, looks you over, and predicts your immediate future. You will indeed stop to pet a cat. The cat is a professional. You walk toward water with a pocket full of symbols, a tongue that still remembers sod, and a mind newly fluent in cup grammar. Whether you believe entirely doesn't matter. Belief is a spice. The real ingredient was attention, and the city keeps plenty of that in stock. Road dust rises around the caravan like a polite halo, and you walk inside it as if the air has learned to carry your steps. Bells from packed camels mark the miles. Tinny steady. The percussion section of trade-on somewhere up front. A mule decides it is also a philosopher and sets a dignified pace. Saddlebags whisper with acre of beans, wrapped tight against weather and guesswork. You touch a bundle and it answers with a dull, friendly thud. Roasted, rested. Ready to become neighborhoods of foam 1,000 doorways from here. The caravan tilts toward the coast. You smell tar and rope, bread, figs, sweat, and the ambitious breath of a harbor. Sacks migrate from camelbacks to appear with the help of men who measure distance by shoulder aches. You take the gangplank with the rest, and the ship replies in Old Wood Creek. Settle, welcome. Somewhere below, a galley stirs, onions, salt, and a pan that remembers yesterday. Up here, a small brazier earns its right to be at sea. Night pulls the sky over the masts. A sailor roasts a shallow pan of beans with the resigned grace of a man who has learned to cook while the floor moves. He pounds them in a dibbock wedged between coils of rope. The pestle beats a rhythm, the waves critique and then applaud. Water goes into a battered says water. He shrugs. Half and half, if the cask is sulking, and sugar if someone remembers. The first rise comes faster than on land. Flame at sea has opinions. He lifts, lowers, and divides the foam with the tip of a spoon dulled by 20 ports. The cup that follows tastes like wind and bargaining. Joke 1 stands at the rail. You swear you can taste longitude. The sailor says, that's just iron. At Venetian docks, the air turns into a bazaar of languages, half of them arguing, the other half selling. You step into a lane lined with turquoise textiles, tulips, tiles and cups that traveled further than their owners. Zarfs glitter in shop windows, filigree catching lagoon light. Finkins sit in porcelain nests, some painted with delicate Ottoman flowers, some with imported putti who look vaguely scandalized by foam. Mainstream fact takes your elbow. By the mid-17th century, Venice knows coffee well. Travelers write of cups poured in back rooms and soon in public rooms, and by 1720 the city boasts Caft, Florian, where silk and gossip learn to share tables. The brew is sometimes called Kafk a la Turca method as much as a map. Sailors carry recipes the way gulls carry weather, lightly, everywhere. A Levantine pilot shows a Venetian boy the rise and sink, the law of cold water first, the etiquette of foam. The boy brings back a mokish pot years later and declares it an improvement. Nobody argues because improvements pack light. You watch the says, at the back of a stall, share bench space with an early e-brick designed to flirt with Western stoves, and you understand that technology is just habit immigrating. The road turns north by water's grace. Trieste lifts from the mist, a quayside with the posture of a ledger. Sacks stamp the deck with new stamps. Mainstream fact nods again. Made free port in the early 18th century, Trieste grows into a coffee capital. A hinge where Ottoman beans meet Habsburg thirst. Warehouses learn the smell of origin stories. Dock men argue over Mocha versus Yemen, as if those were different planets. You accept both planets and ask if anyone has a cup. Markets in Ragusa Dubrovnik fold and unfold like origami. Traders tuck a handful of cardamom into their coffee as if bribing luck. A priest backs into a cup and pretends he meant to. On a quay in Marseille, a broker takes his brew with aniseed and declares it a sacrament of commerce. You learn to nod in multiple dialects of yes. Quirky tidbit leans out of a warehouse doorway. A dockside grinder once used a cannonball to crush beans when the mill broke. The cup tasted like victory and iron filings, and everyone lived to tell a bigger version. You arrive, at last, at the edge where legend insists on a front row seat, Vienna, the year sharp with drums. The city closes its teeth, tents blossom outside the walls. Mornings smell like bread in S. And the city learning to sip what had tried to siege it. Historians still argue whether any of it happened that way, whether the hero was Kolchitsky or a Armenian merchant, whether the first shop even whether milk entered the cup here or elsewhere later. Facts mutter, myths, by the next round. You give the story a respectful nod and ask for something called a cappuccino coffee with cream. The color of capuchin habits a name history will later spin into other drinks. The cup arrives like an apology that learned to charm. Sailors carry methods, not only west but back again. Alexandria. Smyrna, Salonika ports pulse with cups that learn local weather. In one quayside shack, a Greek boy practices briki pours. Across the water, a Turkish auntie scolds him for stirring after heat. In a Dalmatian tavern, a fiddler pours sod from a dented cesp and refuses sugar on principle. In Livorno, a glass merchant brags about a fincon so thin you can see the future through the rim. You ride a cart inland and a penny university in London winks at you from under a wooden sign. Coffeehouses where a coin buys both a cup and a conversation you haven't had yet. Pamphlets breed on tables. Smoke argues with ink. Mainstream fact taps again. By the 1650s, London's coffeehouses are humming. Some with Ottoman beans, others through Dutch or Venetian channels. The style of brewing will wander from Turkish boils to filter methods and percolators, but the idea of the room remains Ottoman in DNA. A public hour, a cup, a chair that belongs to whoever is listening. On a quay in Lisbon, a sailor calls his strong cup Bica and insists the name is an acronym, a century before acronyms get fashionable. Historians still argue whether any of those stories explain the word, or whether Bica is just a pour that found a short, sturdy name. The argument has sugar. You drink both the story and the cup. Sometimes the cups themselves travel as ambassadors. A zarf of mother of pearl and silver crosses tables in Paris, startling a court used to handles. When the Ottoman ambassador Yirmi Mehmed Kelebi visits in the 1720s, he brings an entourage of cups and courtesy. Salons fall briefly, willingly in love with a la turca. You imagine a Parisian hostess practicing the slow pour, then deciding a porcelain filter keeps her dress safer. The recipe changes clothes but keeps its bones. Boxes of words without quantities keep crossing borders and pockets. One you pick up in a warehouse ledger reads like a traveler's rosary: water cold, heat steady, foam shared. If you must sweeten, sweeten before fire. If you add milk, do it like a violin, supporting, not soloing. Another scribbled in a sailor's hand adds, never trust a kettle that boils like gossip. Listen for the hush that sounds like yes. Sailors teach you practicalities. In rough weather, they anchor a cest with a loop of rope. When the pestle goes missing, they tuck beans in a canvas and hammer with a belaying pin. When sugar runs out, molasses stands in and pretends to be refined. Quirky tidbit waves from the bow. A crew once roasted beans in a helmet because the pan made a run for it. The coffee smelled like iron and heroism for a week. You taste the drift of names. Kawa becomes kav, becomes cough, becomes coffee and kava, all of them with that throat-clearing sigh. The method breeds styles. Some cups gain cream, some filters, some steam. In a back alley in Naples, someone pulls water through packed grounds under pressure and swears the future is faster. In a salon in Warsaw, someone still cherishes a zest like a family Bible. What doesn't change is the grammar. Cold water first, no stirring after heat, foam as crown. Or, in new dialects, the equivalent rules. Don't scald, don't rush, let aroma lead. You hold 2 cups at once, one Ottoman, one European cousinand. Feel them tilt toward the same center. Heat made patient, attention made drink. A gull heckles you from a piling. You answer by lifting your cup and offering a sip to the horizon. Joke 2 lazily rolls in. You vow to keep your coffee geopolitics simple. Delicious as one block. More please as the other. The gull votes aye. By the time you find a bench near a custom house, the port has settled into its nitropes, groaning like old friends, lamps leaning into their own reflections. A sailor snores in a coil of line. A clerk dreams in dirhams and ducats. A cat writes its paw signature in dust on a crate of cups. You pull from your sleeve a new known numbers slip pilfered from a Triestine ledger. If the road is long, brew shorter and sweeter. If the wind is harsh, add a rind of lemon. If the language is new, let the foam do the introductions. You fold it into the traveling choir of papers you've collected. Historians still argue whether the firsts matter more than the continuities. First Venetian shop or first Viennese blend. First London pamphlet or first Parisian salon, first cap of cream or first law of foam. You suspect the night votes for continuities. Cups cross borders easier than edicts. Spoons translate faster than treaties. Joke 3 dozes against your shoulder. You consider smuggling a sezvin to every kitchen you'll ever visit and calling it cultural outreach. Your better self says ask first. Your cup says pour now. The tide turns with the sound of a door closing gently. Somewhere, a brazier waits for dawn. Somewhere, a ledger waits for ink. Somewhere, a porter waits for his first sod. You stand, pockets noisy with slips of paper and the echo of many spoons. The caravan you left this morning now lives in a warehouse and a dozen languages. You walk along the water, not hurried, and the city of traveling cups keeps your pace. Ship ropes creak in minims. Waves place punctus at the end of piers, and your breath writes another line on the world's long, warm page. Morning leans against a reading room window, and you lean with it nose almost to the glass. Breath fogging a brief crescent that looks suspiciously like KPK inside is cool air and paper that remembers warmer rooms. You sign the register, wash your hands like promises. and a librarian in soft shoes slides a gray box toward you with the ceremony of a quiet parade. Faded notes, recipes measured in moonbeams. Travelers' scraps with handwriting that knew both storms and sherbets. This is where tonight's cups go to get their birth certificates. You lift a folio, and the page sighs like a brazier settling. The script tilts, the ink behaves, and their marker marching down a column between Akka and Aram. You find the first of many instructions that are not quite instructions. For coffee, measure finely and heat with patience. Sweeten before fire when sweet is desired. No quantities, of course only verbs with good posture. A margin hand adds, divide the foam and you smile, because some rules refuse to fade. Mainstream fact sits up straight. The first printed Ottoman cookbook, Meu Seu Taba, in 1844, doesn't drown you in coffee. Formulaes its pride as stews, pilavs, sherbets, but even there, and in later household manuals, coffee service glints between dishes, roast, pound, brew on sand, and mine the foam. Earlier clues hide in defters and palace ledgers, shopping lists with gossip, cardamom, mastic, rosewater, tin lining for 3 SVs. Between the lines, you can see cups crossing thresholds. You turn to the Travelers of Leah Keleby, with his inventory of cities, -that-are-also-people, European diplomats who write home about rooms where chess and scandal share a cushion. One swears the coffee was perfumed with rosewater. Another insists the cups were black as law. Another takes the compromise of Orda and declares it civilization. The archive becomes a cafe of voices, and you try not to play favorites. Your notebook fills with translations of measures that are less about math than about mood. An acker is roughly a kilo and a bit. A dirham, a few grams. A key reminds you that weights change neighborhoods without warning. You sketch conversions in the margins, whispering apologies to grandmothers who knew better by palm and ear. Joke one yawns into the silence. You promise not to bring a digital scale to your next visit with an elder. Your tote bag rattles treacherously. When the paper trail thins, you walk to kitchens where historians cook on purpose. A copper tray of sand glows on an induction plate that someone swears is tradition adjacent. Scales blink with grams. Timers murmur in seconds. A says hovers like a patient planet. You try a reconstruction from a 19th century notebook. Sod, quick rise for council mornings, or tawny perfumed cup for evening visitors. The first attempt boils. Everyone winces. The second learns humility. Heat down, lift sooner, foam divided like an inheritance. It tastes plausible, then lovely, then true. Historians still argue whether a cup with milk we met it as SDL belongs to Ottoman coffee, or to the slower evolution of cafes under European weather. A food historian pours milk down the inner wall so the foam survives. Another refuses and quotes an 18th century moralist who grumbled that coffee should stand on its own feet. The table votes by emptying both cups, which is how committees move forward. You test the mastic in the cup trick from a palace note. Paint the porcelain, not the drink hand. Your nose remembers the lodges where pine vanilla behaved like kindness. You try a clove cracked into Z curly. It threatens to run the meeting but settles down when sugar introduces it more formally. You heat a speck of ambergris on a spoon, away from the self-respect to Wales and expense, and realize why ledgers mention it rarely. The sea arrives uninvited and refuses to leave. Palace experiment. Yes, daily habit. You'll let the ledger keep its mystery. Corky tidbit tiptoes out of a footnote. An 18th century coffee cologne. A perfumer took spent grounds, distilled them with alcohol and citrus, and sold a morning that you could dab on your wrists. The recipe reads like a dare. A modern perfumer in the room smiles and says, "We could," which in lab language means we secretly already did. On another table, cold dictates culture. You reconstruct a Sokak Cove from port rumors. Brew thick, let the grounds settle, decant, cut with cold water, sweeten to temperament, whisper of lemon if your guest's map borders the sea. It tastes like the square where sherbet sellers sang and snow sellers exhaled mountain breath into glasses. You freeze rosewater into thin wafers and slide a shard into the glass. Summer becomes polite. A conservator brings a defter from the Helvehane and points at ink that used to be numbers and is now only the idea of numbers. Tin lining renewed, you read again and realize reconstructions need metal as much as measures. A modern coppersmith nods and stumps a new tin skin into an old pot. The next cup loses the faint metallic sulk you weren't admitting you tasted. You line up experiments like chess pieces. Sod, orda, zeekerly, cardamom, mastic, nothing at all. Salep thickened, kamak afloat, pekmez murmuring at the bottom. Some sing, some apologize. The salep cup moves like winter in a shawl and divides the room. Is it coffee anymore? Or a cousin who borrowed the family name? Historians still argue whether thickened cups belonged to palace play or broader streets. A pastry scholar produces a page where salep is boss. A social historian counters with diaries that never mention spoons. You write spoon optional and pass both cups down the table. A home cook arrives with a battered dibek and a conviction. Dibek kavesi isn't a substitute. It's a texture mortar pounded coffee, sometimes with cocoa and cardamom, brewed to a softer foam. She pounds and hums. The room falls in love with a rhythm older than scales. The cup lands and tastes like a courtyard at noon. You copy her motion into your wrist for later. You try to rebuild the palace, paste that silent choreography from brazier to chamber. Someone tapes a strip on the floor with the exact number of steps between heat and seat from a court memoir. You balance a tray, count breaths, bow around a corner where a fictional eunuch nearly exists. The foam arrives intact. You grin like a person who passed an exam in a language only copper speaks. Joke to grins back. You announce you're available for royal service. The cat that lives in the archive denies your application. The fortune cups get their hour. You flip, wait, read, and then compare to a printed 19th century symbol book that insists a fish is money, a bird is news, and a snake is a friend's tongue in a bad mood. Your modern reader laughs and says symbols are neighborhoods, not addresses. The reconstruction here is gentler, not correctness, but continuity, the way a cup becomes conversation and conversation becomes care. Debates keep you honest. Historians still argue whether Istanbul's first coffeehouse deserves a single birthday, whether the hot sand image was universal, whether those famous bans were strict practice or stern preface to negotiation. In reconstruction, the arguments become thermostats: too hot, too sure, and you scorch the story; too cool, too timid, and the cup never speaks, so you set the dial to curious and brew again. Late in the day, a researcher opens a carton of postcards from the tulip-era fountains. Moonlight lanterns on boat sand, points to a man balancing 2 ewers on a yoke, ice peeking from tubs at his feet. On the back, a scrawl: cherry, tamarind, violet, rose, coffee strong for the boatman. We drank the breeze. You copy the breeze into your notes, as if it were an ingredient. The last test of the afternoon is old-fashioned mischief. A double foam trial for in-laws. Your Section 9 joke returns to shake your hand. You divide the crown between cups, pour down the inside wall, and float a Kamak coin on one. Diplomacy in dairy. Everyone survives. The foam keeps its dignity. You get a stamp in the pretend passport that lives in your head. You gather your known numbers, slips the traveling catechism. You've been collecting all night and lay them like tiles. Perfume the cup, not the coffee. Sweeten before fire. Foam is a crown, not a fortress. Call the port aloud when you pour. Count rises, not seconds. Don't stir after heat. Measure with breath when scales aren't looking. You realize you've built a book without page numbers. Joke 3 stretches like a well-rested cat. You vow to publish a cookbook titled Grams. Never. A publisher at the table lifts an eyebrow that means we'll talk, which in publishing is a foam that sometimes becomes coffee. The librarian closes the reading room one lamp at a time. You tuck your notes into your sleeve, return the gray boxes to their quiet, and step outside carrying recipes that are more weather reports than laws. The evening smells faintly of cardamom and dust, and pages that enjoyed being touched. You head downhill toward the water. pockets heavy with paper that weighs almost nothing, ready to meet the last ember. The last cup before dawn, the one that makes peace between research and sleep. The night shrinks to its last ember, as if someone pinched the wick with careful fingers. And you follow that ember to the water's edge, where the Bosphorus thinks out loud. A brazier glows on a low wall, a sez leans into the sand like a tired comet. A stack of finkins warms under a folded cloth. Little moons waiting their night's final phase. Gulls pre-write the morning in sketchy loops. Oars kiss, pull, kiss, pull. Somewhere uphill, a baker smacks a board and seeds a row of simmet, with a gesture older than clocks. You sit, jacket pulled close, and the air wears cardamom you can't see. The man at the brazier nods without turning one of those nods that invites trust and threatens nothing. He tilts the sez to show you the quiet arithmetic you already know by feel. Cold water first. A spoon of fine grounds for each cup. A whisper extra for the waves. Sugar now or not at all. He doesn't stir. The sand does the careful work. When the rim silver beads, he lifts barely and lets the first kpk stand. Then sinks the pot again, like a priest lowering a book. You think of all the hands that learned this lift, this pause, this mercy, and feel your own wrist remember without moving. Mainstream fact widens softly across the strait. By the late Ottoman centuries, ferries and quayside stalls routinely served coffee with a glass of water and a small sweet. The courtesy you've met all night water to awaken the tongue, sweet to greet bitterness as a friend, not an intruder. A fisherman sets a cup on the gunwale and sips between knots. A clerk with ink under his nails adds a bite of locum and calls it breakfast's rehearsal. The pour is a ribbon that refuses to scold the foam. He divides the crown between cups, and the last rise and sink turns the cess whisper into done. You cradle the zarf. The rim smells like cocoa and rain and a brass key warmed in a palm. The first sip lands like agreement. Joke one yawns. You promise this is truly the last cup. The gull overhead writes sure across the sky in bird cursive. The ember brightens when the breeze gives it gossip. You look into the cup and see roads, hill paths to Topkapi where ledgers kept their quiet sips. Alleys where Kava Honolulu rehearsed debates under painted rules. Lodge floors where Dicker and Sod measured each other in breaths. Summer squares where Kerbet sellers rang bells over snow. Back rooms where Menengic soothed pulses that had dealt with enough drums. The grounds on your porcelain wall have read your itinerary already. They make little ladders and ships, birds and keys, and you choose to believe them until breakfast. Quirky tidbit strolls over with a grin you've seen at weddings. Brides doobie sometimes salt the groom's coffee during the engagement. Visit Tuslukov to test patience and humor. A good smile over a shocking sip counts as a dowry item you can't put in a chest. The brazier man chuckles when you mention it and sprinkles 1 grain of salt into the sea instead, as if appeasing all future in-laws at once. The sky rubs its eyes. A call to prayer folds from minaret to minaret, thin and certain, and the water answers by smoothing itself as if ironed by sound. You think of the traveling cups you followed, sailors pounding beans and mortar wedged in rope, zarfs glittering in Venetian windows, a Breaky learning the Sesvi's grammar in a Greek lane. A Kapuziner in a Viennese morning pretending myths can be milk. Historians still argue whether the famous Kiva Han, supposedly Istanbul's first coffee house, opened in a neat, dateable moment with named founders from Syria, or whether later nostalgic brochures embroidered a slower arrival into a convenient birth certificate. The Bosphorus abstains from voting. It prefers continuities to anniversaries. The brazier man pours a second round dort at this time, and paints 1 cup's rim with mastic so faintly the foam must lean in to notice. He gives that one to an old woman who appears from nowhere carrying a fish wrapped in newsprint and a look that suggests she has seen both bands and reopings, both palace trays and barber mirrors, and she prefers cups that do not announce their intentions too loudly. She sips and closes her eyes exactly halfway. Fishing boats thrum, the first ferry tests its horn. A vendor tap-taps sesame rings into a basket that smells like morning and yesterday reconciled. You turn your fin con to admire the clean tide line of foam and catch a small star of residue where the pour paused. It looks like punctuation. Maybe the night needed to become day. Joke 2 saunters by. You consider a new resolution foam before opinions and award yourself tenure in your own mind. You let the grounds settle and practice the discipline you've learned. Don't stir after heat. Don't hurry the cup. Don't ask a recipe to be a law. You've collected slips of paper that say the same thing in different voices. Perfume the cup. Not the coffee. Sweeten before fire. Call the port aloud when you pour. Count rises, not seconds. Lids for distance. Water for kindness. Kmac for apologies. Salop for weather. You tuck them deeper in your sleeve until it feels like you're wearing a small, rustling archive. The ember finally agrees to retire. The brazier man caps the tray, wipes the says lip, taps the rim once Ballas habiton, sets the pot down as if placing a sleeping child. He leans on the wall beside you and watches the straight change color from pewter to polished copper. We brew, he says, so morning has something to hold. You believe him because the cup in your hand is holding you back from being too proud to agree. Somewhere behind you, a Cave Folly reader flips a cup and ties a blue bead to its handle for luck. 2 Janissary ghosts in your imagination clack backgammon once, for old time's sake, then fade into the gulls. The Kavochi Bazi you met in the palace turns. The corner of your memory with a tray that never spills, and a ledger line that always balances. The roaster with his dibby pestle singing low sends a little cloud of ground coffee into your sleeve, and your laundry approves. On the square with ice and rosewater. The sherbet seller frost blossoms a glass you can no longer see, but can somehow still taste. The cup cools to a reasonable confession. You take the last sip and let the grounds be the audience they prefer to be silent and certain. The zarf gives back your warmth. Joke 3 yawns a bow. You swear your next drink will be water and your next nap will be civilized. The city pats you on the head and whispers, Inshallah. You stand and thank the brazier man the way a sleeve thanks a cuff by existing neatly. He nods at the ferry, now awake enough to carry everyone's small plans between shores. You pocket one final no-number slip he has somehow conjured from nowhere. For dawn, sod for truth, orda for mercy. Secretly for courage you can taste. If the day argues, remember the foam knows how to keep its crown. You read it once and let the words settle like grounds. When you take your first steps toward the pier, the city walks with you copper, cooled, sand smoothed, ledgers shut. Spoons asleep and, the last ember becomes an idea, that a lost recipe never really goes. Missing if someone keeps pouring it slowly, with attention and a sense of humor. You carry the attention. The humor rides your shoulder like a small, well-behaved cat. The pier greets your shoes. The gull agrees to a truce. Dawn signs its name on the water, and your cup agrees to end so the day can begin. The pier hushes to a low, even breath, and the water smooths itself into long, patient lines that barely remember wind. Lamps blink out one by one, not with hurry but with the calm of rooms that know they'll be needed again. You let your shoulders fall, inch by inch, until the space between collar and neck feels like a soft pocket where sleep can settle. The last warmth from the cup lingers in your hands, and you keep that warmth, letting it travel slowly through palms, wrists, and the simple hinges of your fingers. Around you, the city fades into friendlier shapes. A boat becomes only a curve on the horizon. A minaret, a thin pencil drawing against a brightening page. A gull, a comma in a long, generous sentence. Footsteps on the pier move away and soften. Each one a small dimmer switch. In the quiet, even the coffee seems to loosen its hold, settling into a memory that chooses not to speak. You breathe in the faint sweetness of bread and distant blossoms, and breathe out the last of the night's edges. If a thought arrives, you offer it a saucer, and let it sit without spilling. It can be a small coin on the cup's back, a blue bead on a string, a folded slip of paper that says nothing urgent. You are not deciding anything now. You are allowing the day to approach the way foam approaches the rim slowly, with manners, and exactly as far as it needs to go. The water darkens, then lightens, and you float in that quiet change, as if the whole strait were a warm, steady breath. Your eyes know how to close. The way a zarf knows how to hold a cup, the way sand knows how to keep a glow. Let them. Let the last ember go to ash, soft and safe. Let the city keep watch while you rest. You have traveled well tonight. The recipes can sleep too.